What's up, guys? Welcome to Wizardium. We've got something special today. What if James, Lily, and the Marauders raised Harry and Hermione as the next generation of legends? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The House That Survived the Curse hit the house at 11:07 p.m. James Potter knew the exact time because the grandfather clock in the hallway had been running fast all week, something he'd been meaning to fix, and its hands froze mid-swing when the front door exploded inward. He'd looked at it afterward, standing in the rubble with Harry on his hip and Lily's hand bleeding into his shoulder, and thought, I'll always know exactly when it was. He thought about that clock a lot in the years that followed, but that was later. In the moment there was no room for anything except survival. Voldemort had come quietly. That was the thing no one ever talked about afterward, in the songs and the whispers and the boy who lived headlines. He hadn't announced himself. He hadn't swept in on a wave of dark magic and dramatic entrance. He'd simply been there, the door caving inward with a flick of his wand, and James had half a second of pure animal instinct before his own wand was in his hand. He didn't run. He'd told himself in the months of hiding, in the sleepless nights when Harry cried and the Fidelius charm felt gossamer thin between them and the dark, he told himself he wouldn't run. Not because he was brave in some noble storybook way, because running felt worse than dying. Running felt like teaching Harry something he didn't want him to learn. So he threw every hex he knew in the first 4 seconds, rapid fire, overlapping the way Mad-Eye had drilled into him. Don't think, don't pause, don't give them a breath, and Voldemort deflected them almost lazily, but almost was the operative word. One of James's curses caught the banister. Another scorched the wall above Voldemort's shoulder. A third he couldn't identify hit the stairs and they groaned, and that bought him 3 seconds because Voldemort glanced at the structural collapse with something that might have been genuine annoyance. 3 seconds was enough. Lily was already at the top of the stairs with Harry. She'd had her wand out before the door hit the floor. Of course she had. She was Lily Evans Potter, and she'd been ready for this night since July when Dumbledore first said the word prophecy, and she'd thrown a shield charm over the upper landing that James recognized as her own variation, layered, something she'd developed in the war that could hold against unforgivables for 7 seconds. 7 seconds. James lasted 4 in the hallway. Voldemort hit him with something that wasn't the killing curse. It was darker and more personal than that, a curse James had never seen outside of dark texts, and it lifted him off the ground and threw him through the wall into the sitting room. He hit the fireplace. He felt something in his shoulder give in a way that told him it was very broken. His wand had skittered somewhere he couldn't see. He heard Harry cry upstairs. He heard Lily scream, not in fear, in fury, in that specific register that meant she was about to do something brilliant and extremely dangerous. And then he heard the sound, not a crack, not a bang, something older than that. A resonance, like a bell struck at the bottom of a deep well, the kind of sound that pressed against your sternum and made every hair on your body stand up at once. Later, the scholars would call it ancient magic. Later, Dumbledore would spend months in his office trying to understand exactly what had happened. Later, Lily herself would write 17 feet of notes trying to reconstruct her own instincts in that moment. But in the moment, what it was love, not soft love, not patient love, the other kind. The kind that comes from a mother standing between a monster and the 14-month-old person she would die 1,000 times for without blinking. It was absolute and furious and completely without bargain. Voldemort's Avada Kedavra hit Harry's forehead and bounced. That wasn't supposed to happen. The magic that governed it had never allowed for that. It had never encountered anything that could redirect it because nothing had ever tried, nothing had ever had the structural power, the emotional density, the precise and complete sacrifice of self required to anchor a counter-mechanism in a living child's skin. Harry screamed. The scar split open, lightning-shaped, and it bled, and it glowed, and the rebounded curse caught Voldemort in the chest like a battering ram made of everything he'd ever destroyed coming back to collect. His body came apart, not neatly. It wasn't the clean dissolution of a defeated wizard. It was the violent, convulsive collapse of a soul that had been fractured too many times, split and split and split again by acts of murder, each piece of his essence housed in something else so that he could never fully die, and what hit the floor was not Voldemort, it was a husk. A shell, whatever was left after you subtracted the humanity and most of the soul. A wraith pulled itself free, cold and furious and barely there. It fled through the ruined wall and into the night. The house stopped shaking. James found his wand under the overturned armchair. He walked through the hole in the wall on a broken shoulder and 2 legs that weren't entirely sure they worked, and he climbed the stairs and he found Lily sitting on the nursery floor with Harry in her arms. Harry had stopped screaming. He was looking up at his mother with enormous green eyes, her exact eyes, like looking into a mirror, and the scar on his forehead was already settling into something permanent. Lily looked up at James. Her face was white, there was blood on her lip where she'd bitten through it. Is he? James started. He's perfect, Lily said. Her voice cracked on the second word. He's completely perfect, James. James sat down on the floor next to them because his legs made the decision before he did, and he put his good arm around both of them, and Harry grabbed James's finger in his tiny fist and held on with the grip that all babies had, the reflexive, instinctive grip that meant you're mine and I'm yours and I'm staying. James pressed his face into Lily's hair and breathed. Outside, the night was very quiet. They didn't find out about the Grangers until 3 weeks later. Dumbledore came to the house, the old house, a different one because Godric's Hollow was a ruin and also apparently going to become something of a historical monument, whether James wanted it to or not, and he sat at the kitchen table with his hands folded and told them, in that gentle way he had that was somehow more devastating than anything direct would have been, that a family in Oxfordshire had been attacked. Daniel and Emma Granger, dentists, muggle-born magic running dormant in their bloodline for 3 generations, and their daughter, 5 years old, who had apparently levitated every piece of furniture in her house during the attack, formed a shield that the Death Eaters couldn't breach, and then when the shield dropped was left alone in a house with 2 people who were beyond anyone's ability to help. Hermione Jean Granger, 5 years old, hair like a thunderstorm. Eyes that had seen something she was too young to have seen. She's in St. Mungo's, Dumbledore said. Physically unharmed, there is no magical family on record to take her. The Muggle social services would, of course. No, Lily said. Dumbledore looked at her over his glasses. No, Lily said again, and her voice was the one James recognized from the nursery floor, from 17 months of refusing to accept any reality that wasn't the one she was building. She's 5 years old and she just lost her parents and she did wandless magic to protect herself, Albus. She's not going into Muggle foster care, she'll come here. Lily, Dumbledore said not unkindly, you've just survived. I know what I've just survived. Her eyes were very green and very clear. Bring her here, please. James met Dumbledore's gaze across the table and nodded once. Dumbledore brought Hermione Granger to the Potter house on a Thursday afternoon in November. She stood in the doorway with a small bag that someone had packed for her and looked around the hallway with the expression of someone doing a rapid threat assessment of an unfamiliar environment, which was, James would later think, extremely appropriate given who she'd turn out to be. Harry toddled up to her immediately because Harry had no sense of personal space and an extraordinary lack of self-consciousness for a 1-year-old, and he grabbed the hem of her jumper and looked up at her with complete interest and no social awareness whatsoever. Hermione looked down at him. Then she sat down on the floor, just sat right down, cross-legged at Harry's level, and said, in a very serious voice for someone who was 5, "Hello, I'm Hermione." Harry said something that was probably meant to be hello and definitely came out as something that rhymed with bellowing. Hermione's mouth did something that was almost a smile. She never left. 10 years made a family. Not always an easy one, families never are, and this one had its own specific complications, its own weight of history and magic, and the particular grief of people who had survived things they probably shouldn't have. But 10 years made something real and solid, and by the time the letters came, in July of 1991, there was no version of the Potter household that existed without both of them in it. The letters came on a Tuesday. Errol, the ancient Weasley owl, appeared at the wrong house first, panicked, and then a perfectly composed tawny Hogwarts owl landed on the kitchen windowsill like it had never considered failing at anything in its life, and a second owl, equally composed, as if they'd coordinated, arrived immediately after with a letter addressed in flowing green ink to Miss H. Granger, the Yellow Bedroom, Potter House, Godric's Hollow, Somerset. Hermione had been awake since 5:30. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a copy of Intermediate Runes and their magical applications and a cold cup of tea when the second owl arrived, and she looked at it, looked at the letter, and then looked over her shoulder at the stairs as if calculating exactly how long it would take her to retrieve Harry without making unnecessary noise. She decided against it. She opened her letter with steady hands. "Dear Miss Granger, we are pleased to inform you that you have a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." She read it twice, set it down, picked up her tea, put it down again because it was cold. Then she went upstairs, pushed open the door to Harry's room without knocking. She'd stopped knocking at 12, it had never served any purpose, and said, "They came." Harry was already awake. He was sitting up in bed with his glasses on and the exact expression of someone who had also been waiting since 5:30 but had refused to admit it. His letter was open in his lap. He looked up at her. A grin spread across his face like sunrise, slow, then very sudden. "Finally," he said. Breakfast was the event James had been quietly planning for a week. He made a full fry-up, which was his primary emotional language for significant occasions, and Lily made coffee strong enough to cause structural damage, and Sirius arrived at 7:30 as if he'd been told about the letters, which he hadn't. He simply appeared when things happened. It was one of his most reliable qualities, and Remus came through the front door at 8:10 with 2 books under his arm that he'd been saving for exactly this moment. First years, Remus said, setting the books on the table, should understand the history of what they're walking into. First years, Sirius said, dropping into a chair and stealing a piece of toast from Harry's plate, should understand that Peeves responds to confident authority and will leave you alone if you look like you know where you're going. That is not, Remus started. "I'm telling you from personal experience, Moony. Your personal experience is not a pedagogical framework." "More coffee," Lily said to Hermione. Hermione held out her cup. Please. Harry was reading his letter again. He'd read it 4 times already, but there was something about reading it again that kept feeling necessary. We are pleased to inform you, as if Hogwarts had been waiting for him too, as if it was a mutual thing. He'd grown up knowing the name of every corridor, the theory behind the sorting, the history of the founders, the location of the best shortcuts on the 5th floor. Sirius had provided a map, technically, but reading the letter made it suddenly, concretely real in a way that all the knowledge hadn't. He looked up and found his mother watching him. Lily Potter, at 31, looked almost exactly like she had in the photographs from before the war, except for 2 things. There was a particular quality to her stillness that hadn't been there before, the kind that came from having survived something, and her eyes had a depth that photographs never captured. She was watching Harry the way she always watched him, completely, without reservation, the way most people only looked at things they were afraid of losing. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Ready," Harry said. "Good," she said, "because you are." Sirius leaned across the table and pointed at Hermione. "She's more ready than anyone who's ever walked into that castle." Hermione looked up from her letter. "That's statistically uncertain." "It's a compliment, Granger. I know, I'm just being accurate." "She's going to eat Hogwarts alive," Sirius said, to no one in particular, with an enormous amount of satisfaction. "They're going to eat it alive," James corrected, glancing at Harry, and there was something in the way he said it, quiet and certain and deeply proud, that made Harry sit up a little straighter. Later, when the breakfast dishes were done and Sirius had challenged Remus to a debate about the best Hogwarts prank of the 1970s that would clearly consume the rest of the morning, James took Harry aside in the garden. The hollyhocks Lily had planted were very tall this year, and bees were doing their work in the lavender, and it was a completely ordinary summer morning that felt somehow like the last of something. "You know," James said, settling onto the old bench by the wall, "there are going to be people there who have ideas about you before you walk through the door." Harry sat next to him. "Because of the scar, because of the scar, because of your name, because of your mother's name." James looked at the lavender. "They're going to want to make you into something, a symbol, a story, a thing that belongs to them because of what happened 10 years ago. Some of them will do it kindly, some won't." "I know," Harry said. "I know you know, I'm just saying it out loud." James turned to look at him. James Potter, at 41, was still recognizably the young man in all the photographs, the unruly black hair, the wire-framed glasses, the face that defaulted to amusement, but there were lines around his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Lines that Harry had always understood in the way children understood things about their parents without being told explicitly were about that night, about the cost of what had happened. You don't owe them the story, you don't have to perform it for anyone. You don't have to be smaller so they're more comfortable, and you don't have to be bigger to impress them, you just have to be you. That's always been enough. Harry was quiet for a moment. "Then did you give Hermione a speech too?" James's face did something complicated and fond. "Hermione doesn't need speeches. Hermione needs someone to occasionally tell her to sleep before midnight, which no one has ever successfully done. Lily does sometimes. Lily is terrifying." James said it with the tone of profound admiration. "That's different." Harry grinned, then more quietly, "Dad, what if Voldemort comes back while we're at Hogwarts?" James didn't flinch at the name. He'd made a point of never flinching at the name. "Then you'll know what to do, because you trained us, because we trained you." James's voice was straightforward about it, no performance. "You and Hermione are the 2 most prepared 11-year-olds who have ever had the misfortune of being 11 years old. You know more defensive theory than most 6th years. You can cast non-verbally under pressure. You can identify a dark curse by the color of its light and the sound it makes on impact. You can brew a calming draught in 20 minutes and an antidote to most common poisons in 40. He paused. "Also, Mooney made sure you understand the ethical framework, which I personally think is slightly overdone, but Lily agreed with him, so." "The ethical framework is important," Harry said, which was almost directly a quote from Remus, and James heard it. "See, he got to you. He's right, though. He's always right. It's extremely annoying." James stood up, stretching. "Go finish packing. Your mother will check your trunk and she'll find whatever you forgot, but try to give her less than 7 items to add." Harry stood too. He was almost James's height already. Lily's fault, probably. She was taller than people expected. And when James looked at him straight on, there was a moment of pure vertigo, because Harry had Lily's eyes and James's face, and something entirely his own in the set of his jaw and the clarity of his expression. James reached out and ruffled his hair exactly once, because he was 41 and a war survivor, and he was not going to get emotional in the garden. "Go on then," he said. "Go be legendary." Harry rolled his eyes, which was both his most Lily-inherited trait and the one James was most privately delighted by, and went inside. The last week before Hogwarts was structured, because Remus structured things and no one had ever figured out how to stop him, and because James and Lily had agreed in the quiet of their bedroom that the last week should include a few sessions that weren't on the official curriculum of any school. Remus ran the last one himself, in the study that had been converted years ago into something resembling a small defense classroom, with the furniture pushed back and the rug rolled up, and the permanent scorch marks on the eastern wall that no one ever talked about but Hermione had documented in a notebook somewhere. He walked them through a scenario. Two Death Eaters, he said with the voice he used when he was being completely serious, which was different from his usual voice in register and precision. Experienced, working together, one casts, one covers, you've been separated. Hermione, you're at the north end. Harry south, you have 4 seconds before the combined fire reaches either of you. What do you do? Ward the choke point, Hermione said immediately. The one they're using to coordinate their sight lines. If they lose visual on both of us simultaneously, they have to split focus. Harry shields while I set the ward, then I take the offensive while Harry redirects. Take 6 seconds minimum, Remus said. 4 if we're non-verbal, Harry said. Which we are. Hermione puts up the ward without announcing it. I shield and buy the 2 seconds she needs, then she... Already casting, Hermione said. Remus looked at them for a moment. Then he made a small, satisfied sound. Again, but this time one of the Death Eaters knows what ward Hermione tends to use. He's prepared for it. Then I use a different one, Hermione said. Which one? Hermione thought for exactly 2 seconds. Modified Protego Diabolica, contained. I can control the spread without... You can't cast that, Remus said. Not stably, it requires... I know what it requires. She met his eyes. I've been practicing. Remus was silent for a moment. Then he said very carefully, show me. What followed was 10 minutes that Remus would later describe to James as quietly terrifying in the best possible sense. Hermione walked him through the casting, slow, deliberate, nothing showy, just precise, and the flame that appeared was small and perfectly controlled. A ring no larger than a serving plate that she held, adjusted, and extinguished with complete calm. Remus sat down on the edge of the desk. When did you learn that? February, Hermione said. I found the theoretical framework in your restricted bookshelf. Don't look like that, Remus. You gave me the access code and I worked out the wand movement modification that prevents the feedback loop. It took me about 6 weeks of theory and then 4 attempts. 4 attempts, Remus repeated, 2 of which were controlled failures, educational ones. You could have told me. Hermione tilted her head slightly. I wanted to make sure I had it right first. She paused. I didn't want to show you something half done. Remus looked at Harry. Did you know about this? She told me in March, Harry said. I'm not supposed to tell you things she's still working on. We have an agreement. You have an agreement, Remus said, which was not a question. It's a good system, Harry said. Remus rubbed his face with one hand, which was his version of a laugh. I genuinely cannot tell if I've done my job too well or correctly. Correctly, Hermione said. Definitely correctly. That evening, with the study tidied and the furniture back in place, and the summer dark settling over the garden, Lily sat with both of them at the kitchen table while James and Sirius argued about Quidditch in the sitting room, a long-standing ritual that seemed to require exactly this level of volume, and she talked to them about Hogwarts the way she'd been talking to them about things since they were small, not like a teacher. Like someone who'd been there and wanted them to have all the information she'd wished she'd had. The castle is going to feel enormous at first, she said, even if you know the layout. There's a difference between knowing a map and walking in a physical space, and the first few days your instincts will adjust. Let them. I know the map, Hermione said. I know you know the map. Lily's voice was dry and affectionate. I'm saying your feet will need to learn it. That's different. Pay attention to the staircases in particular. They're not reliable, and the castle has moods. The castle has moods, Harry said. Yes, it's old and it's alive in the way that very old magical places are alive, and it has preferences. It will like you, both of you. This was said with complete confidence, not reassurance. Hogwarts responds to intent. You'll feel it. What was your favorite part? Harry asked. When you were there, Lily thought about it. Defense against the dark arts, obviously. Transfiguration. The library at 2 in the morning when the night students had gone to sleep and it was just the sound of pages and the enchanted candles. She smiled, and it was the particular smile that meant she was somewhere else briefly, somewhere good. The feeling of being somewhere that was made for people like me, for magical people. After 17 years in the Muggle world being an inexplicable anomaly, walking into Hogwarts felt like exhaling. She looked at both of them and her face was open and serious and exactly like herself. You've had something I didn't have, she said. You've always known what you are. You've had people around you who understood and taught and prepared you. That's not something to feel guilty about, it's something to use. When you walk into that castle, you walk in as yourselves, completely and without apology. Not arrogant, but never small either. You sound like Dad, Harry said. Your father, Lily said with the specificity of someone who had made peace with an enormous personality, occasionally makes a valid point. He'll be unbearable when they write home, Hermione said. He will be completely unbearable, Lily agreed. Sirius will be worse. Remus will send books. He's already bought 12. Lily stood, gathering cups. He wrapped them. He used the sparkly paper because he thinks it's ironic and can't admit he actually likes sparkly wrapping paper. Harry grinned. Hermione looked down at the table and did the thing she sometimes did when she was trying not to smile and failing at it. Then Hermione said quietly, not looking up, Lily. Lily paused. Thank you for the last 10 years. Hermione's voice was perfectly level in the way that meant she was managing something under the surface. For taking me in, for making this feel like it was always the plan. Lily set down the cups. She sat back down at the table across from Hermione and she looked at her for a moment with that complete, undivided attention she had. Then she reached across and put her hand over Hermione's. It was always the plan, she said. We just didn't know it yet. Harry reached across and put his hand on top of both of theirs, because he had, like his father, an instinct for the gesture that mattered, and also because 10 years of living with Hermione had given him an encyclopedic understanding of every moment when she needed something solid to hold on to. The three of them sat like that for a moment in the warm kitchen, while Sirius's voice rose in the next room about the Kenmare kestrels and James's answering laugh rolled through the wall, and the summer night pressed gently against the windows. In the morning they would go to Diagon Alley. Then the week would count down and the trunks would be packed and the owls would be fussed over, and James would pretend not to be emotional about it and fail spectacularly. Sirius would give them something outrageous and contraband that Lily would confiscate and return quietly an hour later. Remus would hand each of them a carefully wrapped book and tell them to owl him with any questions and mean it. And then platform 9 3/4 would come and the Hogwarts Express, and a future that was already waiting for them with the patience of something that knew exactly how this was going to go. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, in the kitchen that smelled like coffee and the lavender from the garden, with laughter in the walls and a family in every direction she looked, Hermione Granger let herself hold on. And Harry Potter, who had never once in his 11 years on Earth doubted that he was loved, not for a single moment, not for a single day, looked at his family and felt something that wasn't quite excitement and wasn't quite peace but was something better than both. He was ready. Chapter 2, Platform 9 3/4. The trolley had a squeaky wheel. Harry noticed it immediately, that small, persistent complaint against the stone floor of King's Cross, punctuating every push through the crowd, and he found it oddly grounding. The rest of the station was enormous and loud and smelled like diesel and stale pastry, and the particular electric anxiety of 1,000 people going somewhere important, and the trolley's squeak was something small and manageable to pay attention to while his brain processed everything else. Hermione was 3 steps ahead of him, as usual. He had a system for crowds, slight shoulder turn, measured pace, never stop moving that she developed somewhere around age 8 and refined into something that looked effortless. Her cat, Crookshanks, was in a carry on top of her trunk, radiating the aggressive displeasure of a cat who had opinions about travel and wasn't keeping them to himself. He's going to sulk the entire train ride, Harry said. He always sulks, Hermione said without turning around. And then he's fine, he's dramatic. You named a dramatic cat Crookshanks. I named him after his legs. The drama was a personality development. Behind them, the full gravitational force of the Marauder send-off was in effect. James was carrying 2 trunks simultaneously and complaining about it to no one in particular. Sirius was arguing with a pigeon that had landed on a nearby bench, apparently feeling strongly that it was in his way. Remus had a list, an actual physical handwritten list on notepaper, of things he wanted to confirm were in Hermione's trunk before she boarded. Lily was the only one moving with any real efficiency, cutting through the crowd with the focused grace of someone who had organized far more chaotic situations than King's Cross on a September morning. Remus, Lily said over her shoulder, the list can wait until we're through the barrier. It's a short list, Remus said. It's 11 items, Hermione said. She hadn't looked at it. She had, Harry was quite certain, memorized it 2 days ago. 9, Remus said. You added 2 last night. Remus opened his mouth, closed it, and accepted this. The barrier between platforms 9 and 10 was a section of unremarkable brick wall that looked exactly like a barrier between platforms 9 and 10, which was the point. Harry had been through it before a few times over the years on dry runs or for other reasons, but there was something different about it today. Something that made him walk at it with his whole attention rather than the casual confidence he'd expected to feel. He went through first. The brief cold pressure of the boundary, the sound of the Muggle station dropping away behind him, and then platform 9 3/4. The Hogwarts Express sat against the platform in full red and black magnificence, enormous and steam-wreathed and almost aggressively real. The platform was packed with families, parents crouching to hug children, owls ruffling feathers in their cages, cats sitting on trunks with the same expression Crookshanks was wearing, students calling to each other across the crowd. The air tasted like coal smoke and magic in September. Harry stood for a moment and just looked at it. Hermione materialized beside him. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, which was her version of awe. It's bigger than I expected, she said. You've read every description of it. Reading and seeing are different things, she said, which was almost exactly what Lily had said about maps versus feet, and Harry didn't point that out because Hermione occasionally got a look on her face when she accidentally quoted Lily without realizing it, and the look was complicated and private and not his to comment on. The rest of the family came through behind them, and then the send-off commenced in earnest. Remus did the list. She had everything, including the 2 items he'd added last night and 3 additional ones she'd packed on her own initiative that weren't on anyone's list. He handed her a book wrapped in sparkly paper that he'd been carrying under his arm since Paddington. Intermediate Transfiguration Theory, he said. McGonagall will appreciate that you've read it. I've already read Advanced Transfiguration Theory, Hermione said. Remus stared at her. That's a 6th-year text. I know, she tucked it into her bag without ceremony. Remus turned to Harry, recalibrated, and handed him a copy of the Strategic Mind, Tactical Defense for the Practicing Witch and Wizard. Moody recommended it, Remus said, which means it's either excellent or deeply paranoid, possibly both. Moody's version of a birthday present was a personal dossier on known Death Eaters still at large, Harry said. This seems tame by comparison. He meant it as an educational resource, Remus said, with the tone of someone who'd had this conversation before. Sirius's gift was a folded piece of parchment that he pressed into Harry's hand with a significant look and absolutely no explanation. Harry opened it, then he looked up. "Is this updated?" Sirius said. "With additions." The password to the 7th floor bathroom that wasn't on the original, the 3 shortcuts Filch found and blocked in '89 that have since been unblocked, I have sources, and a small notation about which members of staff are most likely to be found in which corridors after 10 p.m. "Sirius," Lily said. "It's for safety, Lily. It's really not. It could be." Harry folded it back up and put it in his inside pocket with the satisfied efficiency of someone who had wanted exactly this. James saved his for last. He waited until Lily was occupied with helping Hermione rebalance her trunk on the trolley, and Sirius and Remus were in their perennial argument about something, and then he drew Harry slightly aside by the shoulder and looked at him for a moment with that specific expression that Harry had learned over 11 years meant that what came next was real. "I want to tell you something," James said. "You've already told me about 5 things today," Harry said. "Garden at breakfast. This is different." James's voice was quieter than usual. "This is the one I didn't know how to say before." Harry waited. "I was scared," James said. "That night, terrified. I want you to know that because I think," he paused, working it out, "I think there's a version of the story you might have grown up with where your dad was fearless and your mum was fearless and it was all very clean and heroic. And I don't want that version. I want you to have the real one." "You're not fearless," Harry said. "I know that." "Right, I'm absolutely not, but I went into that hallway anyway." James looked at him steadily. "That's all bravery is, being scared and going anyway because something matters more than the fear. You know what mattered more that night?" Harry didn't say anything because he knew the answer and also because his throat was doing something inconvenient. "So here's what I want you to take with you," James said. "Not the hero stuff, not the legend stuff. When you're scared, and you will be because you're not an idiot and scared is the appropriate response to frightening things, just ask yourself what matters more. The answer will tell you what to do." Harry nodded once, precise. James pulled him into a hug that was brief and firm and communicated an entire paragraph more effectively than words, and then released him and clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Right. Go get on the train before your mother cries in public and neither of us ever recovers from that." "I'm not going to cry," Lily said from directly behind them in a tone that suggested she'd been standing there for at least 30 seconds. "Of course not," James said. "I'm not." She pulled Harry into a hug that lasted considerably longer than James's and was also considerably tighter. "I'm just extremely proud of you," she said into his hair. "Both of you already. Before you've done a single thing at that school." "We haven't done anything yet," Harry said. "I know, doesn't matter." She let him go and looked at him and did not cry, which he would appreciate for the rest of his life. "Right, often, more often than you think is necessary." "Lily," Hermione said, and there was the same compressed weight in that word that there'd been in the kitchen, the same complicated geography of the last 10 years in 2 syllables. Lily turned and hugged Hermione and didn't say anything at all because nothing needed saying, and Hermione held on for 3 seconds and then stepped back with her chin at the exact angle that meant she was holding herself together through sheer structural willpower. "Right," Harry said. "We're going." "You're going," Sirius confirmed. "Go be extraordinary." "You're already extraordinary," Remus corrected. "Go demonstrate it." "Go find the Hufflepuff first year's passage on the 4th floor," Sirius added. "That's not a real passage," Remus said. "It absolutely is." "I'll find it," Harry said, "and I'll tell you which of you is right." They boarded the train with their trunks in the guard's compartment and Crookshanks in his carrier and the noise of the platform behind them, and Harry felt the precise moment the Hogwarts Express became its own world, enclosed and forward-moving, pulling away from everything familiar toward everything that was about to begin. He leaned against the window as the platform slid away. James had his arm around Lily's shoulders. Sirius was waving with both arms, which looked like he was trying to signal an aircraft. Remus stood with his hands in his pockets and watched with an expression of such complete, quiet pride that it was somehow the loudest thing on the platform. Harry held up a hand. The train turned a corner. They were gone. They found a compartment midway down the train, which was Hermione's preferred position, not too far from the front to be inconvenient, far enough from the back to avoid whatever chaos typically developed there. She had read enough about the Hogwarts Express's social geography to have strong views. Crookshanks sulked in his carrier for approximately 4 minutes and then somehow let himself out and occupied the seat between them with the air of a landlord claiming a property. "You locked that," Harry said. "He opens locks," Hermione said. "I don't know how. I've decided not to investigate because I think I prefer not knowing." Harry reached over to scratch Crookshanks behind the ears. Crookshanks fixed him with an amber stare of considered tolerance and then slowly leaned into the scratch, which was as close to approval as he apparently offered. They were alone in the compartment for about 20 minutes before the door slid open. A boy with a round face and a toad in his cupped hands looked in with the expression of someone who'd been searching for a long time and was running out of options. "Sorry," he said. "Have you sorry? I know this is I've lost Trevor." "That's a toad," Harry said helpfully. "Yes." The boy looked down at his hands. "I found him again. He keeps sorry. I'm Neville Longbottom." Harry recognized the name. He'd been told about the Longbottoms, not in detail, not in the way that would have been unkind, but enough. He knew Frank and Alice Longbottom had been auras. He knew what had happened to them. He knew that Neville had been raised by a grandmother who by most accounts operated at a frequency of permanent mild disappointment. He also knew that Neville Longbottom had been born one day before Harry in late July, and that the prophecy could just as easily have been about him. That was the kind of thing James had told him calmly and directly when Harry was 8, because James Potter's approach to difficult truths was to face them head-on before someone else got there first. "I'm Harry," Harry said. "This is Hermione. Sit down if you like." Neville looked at the empty seats, at Crookshanks occupying the middle of one of them, at Harry and Hermione, and then sat down with the careful, slightly apologetic posture of someone who'd been made to feel like an imposition for so long he'd internalized it structurally. "You're Harry Potter," Neville said, and then immediately looked like he regretted saying it. "Yeah," Harry said. "Just Harry's fine." Neville nodded. He held Trevor more securely. There was a silence that Hermione would normally have filled with something, but she was looking at Neville with her head tilted slightly and the expression she wore when she was recalibrating her initial read of someone. "Longbottom," she said. "Your parents were auras, Frank and Alice." Neville's face did something complicated and quick. "Yes, they were exceptional," she said, and it wasn't flattery, it was the tone she used for facts. "Remus Lupin taught us wizarding history alongside the defensive curriculum. Your parents came up repeatedly. Your father developed a modified shield hex that's still used in aura training." Neville stared at her. I didn't know that." "You should." She held his gaze. "It's worth knowing." There was another silence, but a different quality of silence. Neville looked at his toad. Then he looked back up with something slightly more settled in his expression, as if something had been quietly rearranged behind his eyes. "Gran says I'm not much of a wizard," he offered by way of general information. "Does she?" Harry said. "She's always hoping I'd show more." He stopped. "Anyway, she means well." "She's wrong," Hermione said matter-of-factly. "About the wizard part, probably not wrong that she means well." Neville blinked. "You don't know that," he said. "You've known me for 4 minutes. I know that the standards applied to the children of exceptional people are frequently unfair," Hermione said, "and that not meeting someone else's expectations and not being much of a wizard are different statements. One is about expectation, the other is about capacity." She opened her book. "You kept catching your toad, didn't you?" Neville looked down at Trevor. "Yes. That required locating a very small creature in a moving train using what was presumably magic, since you'd have found him through mundane searching already if that worked. Not a trivial thing." She turned a page. "So," Neville sat with that for a moment, then something shifted in his posture very slightly, like a jacket settling into a better fit. "Right," he said. Thanks." "Don't thank me," Hermione said. "It's just accurate." The compartment door slid open again without a knock. A boy with platinum blonde hair and 2 larger boys arranged behind him like architectural features looked in, swept his gaze around the compartment, and landed on Harry with the specific quality of attention that came from having rehearsed this moment. Harry recognized Draco Malfoy the way you recognize someone you'd been briefed on. He'd heard the name, he'd been told the family background, he understood the politics. He had a rough working picture of the ideology Draco had been raised in. He looked at Draco and saw a boy who'd been told his whole life that the world had an order and he was near the top of it, and who was now doing the mental arithmetic of what Harry Potter existing in this compartment meant for that order. "Harry Potter," Draco said, not a greeting, a confirmation. "Draco Malfoy," Harry said in exactly the same tone. Something flickered across Draco's face. He hadn't expected the name to come back at him. He'd expected awe or nervousness, or the blank ignorance of someone raised outside the wizarding world who didn't know who the Malfoys were. He'd expected something he could work with. He hadn't expected an 11-year-old looking at him with calm recognition and complete absence of impression. "I thought I'd come and introduce myself," Draco said, adjusting. "You've done it," Harry said. Another flicker. Draco's eyes moved to Hermione, clocked her, assessed her, moved on in a way that logged without investing, and then to Neville, where they settled with a different quality of attention. "Longbottom," he said. Neville's shoulders went up slightly. "Don't," Harry said. Draco looked back at him. "I didn't say anything." "You were going to say something about his parents," Harry said, "or his grandmother or his toad as a proxy for something else." "Don't." Draco's jaw tightened. He was intelligent enough to understand that he'd been read, which was worse than being opposed. "You don't know what I was going to say." "I made an educated guess." Harry's voice was even and unimpressed. "I'm going to be right more often than not. It's not a slight, it's just pattern recognition." Draco looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone revising a strategy in real time. Then he said, "I'll see you at the sorting," and left. The 2 large boys followed. The compartment door slid shut. Neville exhaled. "That happens a lot?" Harry asked him. "Mostly it's just the way he looks," Neville said, "like he already knows something about you that you don't." "He doesn't," Hermione said without looking up from her book. He just acts like it. The look is a choice, not information. Neville looked at Hermione with the expression of someone adding her to a very short list of people they found genuinely reassuring. The train ran on through England, through green countryside and small station towns and bridges over rivers Harry didn't know the names of. The trolley which came and went. They shared cauldron cakes and a pack of chocolate frogs that Hermione collected the cards from with methodical efficiency. 2 other students wandered in briefly, a girl named Lavender who stayed for 20 minutes and a boy named Dean Thomas who stayed for 10, and then it was just the 3 of them again as the light outside went golden and then blue and then dark. By the time the announcement came to change into robes, Harry felt strangely like the train ride had already given him something, not information, just the beginning of a shape, the outline of something he didn't have a name for yet. He thought about Neville's shoulders going up when Draco looked at him, and the way they'd come back down afterward, and he thought about Hermione saying you should know that about Frank Longbottom's shield hex, in the exact voice she used for things she meant completely. He pulled on his robes in the corridor while Hermione pulled rank on the compartment to change, and he thought, okay, so this is what it starts like. Hogwarts from the Lake at Night was something that words, Harry concluded, were genuinely inadequate for. He'd seen photographs. He'd heard descriptions from 4 separate people who'd loved this place. He'd had the layout described so many times he could walk the first 3 floors blind. None of it had prepared him for the actual castle rising from the black water in the torchlight, enormous and alive and ancient in the bone-deep way that meant centuries of magic saturating every stone. Beside him in the boat, Hermione was very still. Neville on Harry's other side had both hands on the sides of the boat and was managing the lake with the focused determination of someone conquering something personal. Okay, Harry said quietly. Completely, Neville said with the specific conviction of someone who was not completely okay but was choosing to be. Harry looked at the castle. He felt it. Lily had been right. There was something that answered back when you looked at it, some quality of attention in the old stones. Not human exactly, but not indifferent. Aware in the way that very old things with very long memories were aware that something significant was arriving. He sat up straighter in the boat. The entrance hall had a ceiling that was higher than reason required and suits of armor and a staircase that went up and in 3 directions simultaneously. Professor McGonagall met them, straight-backed, silver-haired, with the expression of someone who had been doing this for decades and still cared about it, which Harry found enormously reassuring, and gave them the standard speech about houses and manor and the sorting in a voice that was crisply unsentimental and all the more calming for it. She's exactly what Lily described, Hermione murmured. Down to the expression, Harry said. McGonagall was leading them toward the doors when she paused, turned, and looked directly at Harry with the focused attention of someone acknowledging something. Mr. Potter, she said. Welcome. Thank you, Professor, Harry said. Something crossed her face very briefly, deeply private, and then she turned back and opened the doors. The great hall opened up. 4 long tables, hundreds of students, and a ceiling that wasn't a ceiling but the night sky with its actual stars and the actual clouds, enchanted to show the outdoors overhead. It was, objectively, one of the most spectacular things Harry had ever seen, and he'd grown up in a house with a garden where James occasionally demonstrated illegal transfiguration for the entertainment of his children. He was aware of the attention. It came in waves. The first years noticed Harry Potter in the crowd, and then the word went backward through the older students like a ripple, and the noise didn't stop exactly but it changed quality. He felt it settle on him, all that looking, and he filed it away without reacting to it. Hermione was beside him. She'd clocked the room in 4 seconds. He knew the way she moved when she was cataloguing, and she stood with the particular stillness of someone who was completely sure of herself and saw no reason to perform it. The sorting hat sat on a stool at the front. It was old and patched and had the concentrated authority of something that had been doing one extremely important job for a very long time. It opened its wide brim and sang. Harry listened to the song with genuine interest. It was different every year, Remus had said. The hat wrote a new one each time, which meant it was actually thinking, actually composing, actually paying attention. The song this year was about unity and division, about the founders and their vision, and there was a particular stanza near the end that seemed to be about something beyond the usual houses are different but equal message, something about a time of testing coming, something that made the older teachers' faces go briefly still. Dumbledore at the high table was listening with his fingers steepled and his expression thoughtful. The sorting began. Harry watched it and assessed it. He'd read the history of the hat's decision-making, discussed it with Remus and Lily and James, and had come to his own conclusions about where he was likely to go. He had James's instinct for bravery, which landed him in Gryffindor territory. He had Lily's analytical mind, which overlapped with Ravenclaw. He had the strategic thinking that was either Slytherin or a different kind of Gryffindor depending on how you looked at it. He decided he didn't care particularly, as long as Hermione was in the same house. He'd told Hermione this. She'd said that statistically the 2 most probable outcomes were Gryffindor for both of them or Gryffindor for him and Ravenclaw for her, and she'd done the math on the second scenario and had opinions about it. Granger, Hermione. The great hall went slightly quieter as Hermione walked to the stool. Harry couldn't tell if it was because people recognized the name or because she walked in a way that drew attention, which wasn't arrogance. She simply moved like someone with direction, and direction was magnetic. She sat. The hat was placed on her head and dropped over her eyes. It was quiet for a moment. And then, Gryffindor, the Gryffindor table erupted. Harry exhaled. Hermione took off the hat with complete composure, handed it back to Professor Flitwick, and walked to the Gryffindor table like she'd known all along, which she probably had. More names. Neville Longbottom. The hat barely touched his head before it shouted Gryffindor, which made Neville look startled and then quietly pleased. A girl named Parvati Patil, Gryffindor. A boy named Ron Weasley who went to Gryffindor amid a cheer from somewhere in the upper years that was clearly siblings. Potter Harry. The Great Hall did something Harry had not fully anticipated, which was go completely silent, not the ordinary hush of attention. Actual silence, the kind that happened when an entire room made a collective unconscious decision to stop making noise because something felt significant. He walked to the stool aware of every single person in that room, every gaze, every breath. He sat down. The hat dropped over his eyes and the Great Hall disappeared. Well, said the hat, and it said it the way someone says well when they've been waiting for something and it's finally arrived. This is interesting. I'm told that a lot, Harry said. He wasn't sure if he was speaking out loud or thinking it, but the hat seemed to receive it either way. You have the courage of your father, the hat said, and the mind of your mother, and something else entirely that's yours alone. I can see what they made you into. A pause. What do you want? To be somewhere I can do what I came here to do, Harry said. And what did you come here to do? Harry thought about the hallway at Godric's Hollow, which he didn't remember but had been described to him. He thought about Hermione sitting cross-legged on the floor of their childhood home at eye level with a 1-year-old she'd never met saying hello. He thought about Neville's shoulders. He thought about Draco's look and the gap between that look and any actual knowledge it contained. Make sure the people worth protecting get protected, he said, and make sure the people worth stopping get stopped. Direct, the hat said with something that might have been approval, no ambiguity at all. Gryffindor then, but you should know there was a time I'd have argued for Slytherin. The strategy in you is not ordinary. I know, Harry said, I can use it just fine in Gryffindor. The hat's wide brim rippled. Yes, it said, I imagine you can, Gryffindor. The table's cheer this time had a different quality than it had for anyone else, not louder exactly, but fuller, like it was carrying more than one thing at once. Harry took the hat off and handed it back and walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down next to Hermione, who looked at him with the expression that meant she'd been watching carefully. Well, she said. Gryffindor, he said. Obviously, she pushed a bread roll toward him. It tried for Slytherin, didn't it? Mentioned it. Mine mentioned Ravenclaw. What did you tell it? She picked up her goblet. That Gryffindor had better company, Harry grinned. The feast appeared and the noise returned, and the candles above them lit the ancient hall gold. And Harry looked down the table at this gathering of people he didn't know yet. Neville carefully eating. Ron Weasley talking enthusiastically about something with the twins across from him. Lavender, Dean Thomas, and thought about what it was going to be like to build something here. Not a reputation, not a legend, just something real. Across the hall, Draco Malfoy was watching him from the Slytherin table with the expression of someone recalculating. Harry met his eyes for exactly 1 second, then looked away. He didn't need to win that right now. He had time. After the feast, they climbed. The moving staircases were exactly as described and completely different to navigate in person. They shifted mid-step twice, which should have been disorienting, but was mostly just requiring very good balance, which Harry had in quantity and Hermione had through sheer force of will. Neville had grabbed the railing and gone with it philosophically. The Gryffindor common room was through a portrait of a very round woman in a pink dress, who was the fat lady, and who looked at Harry with an expression of theatrical emotion before composing herself and asking for the password. Inside, red and gold and deep armchairs and a fire that was already burning, bookshelves and notice boards and the worn comfort of somewhere that had held 100 years of students. Harry felt the castle's awareness again more clearly here, a warmth in the walls, a quality of welcome. He stood in the middle of the common room for a moment and simply felt it. Hermione was already at the bookshelves, not reading, just looking, running her fingers along spines, cataloguing. Hermione, he said. What do you think? She turned from the shelf. She looked around the room at the fire, the other first years settling in, the red warmth of it, the portraits on the walls that were already watching with mild interest. Then she looked at Harry. I think, she said carefully, that it's going to be the most challenging and the most worthwhile thing we've ever done. She paused. And I think we're going to be very good at it. Not just good, Harry said, her mouth curved. No, she agreed, not just good. Percy Weasley, who had been designated as prefect escort and had been waiting with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed this job, cleared his throat. Boys' dormitories are up the left stair, he said. Girls up the right. Trunks have been sent up. First lesson starts at 9 tomorrow. Timetables at breakfast. He paused. Welcome to Gryffindor. Harry picked up his bag. The dormitory was circular, with 5 beds hung with red curtains and brass fixtures and a window that looked out over the grounds. His trunk was at the foot of the bed by the window, which he hadn't chosen and which felt, regardless, exactly right. Neville was in the bed to his right, coaxing Trevor back into his small tank with murmured reassurances. A boy named Seamus Finnegan was already in bed claiming he needed his sleep. Dean Thomas was pinning something to the wall by his bed with methodical care. Harry sat on the edge of his bed and pulled the Marauders map from his inner pocket and opened it. The castle spread across the parchment, corridors, classrooms, staircases, all of it. He read it for a few minutes the way you reread something familiar before sleep, not to learn but to orient. Then he folded it, put it under his mattress where it was easily accessible and not obviously hidden, and lay back with his hands behind his head and looked at the curtained canopy above him. He thought about his father's face on the platform. Go be legendary. He thought about Lily's voice, never small. He thought about the hat. There was a time I'd have argued for Slytherin. The strategy in you is not ordinary. He thought about Neville's shoulders going up and then coming down. He thought about the castle's welcome, the way it had felt like recognition. He reached over and turned off his bedside lamp. In the dark, Neville said quietly, "Good night." "Night, Neville," Harry said. A pause. "Harry," Neville said. "Yeah, thanks, earlier on the train." Harry thought about that, about Hermione's quiet precision, about what she'd said about Frank Longbottom's hex, about the right word at the right moment being as important as any spell. "Anytime," he said, he meant it. The fire in the Gryffindor common room burned on below them, and the castle settled around its newest residents with the patience of something that had been waiting a long time and found, on this particular night, that it was satisfied with what had arrived. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Trouble. The first thing Hermione did on her first morning at Hogwarts was find the library, not because she needed anything from it yet. Just to know where it was in the specific, physical, standing in its sense that mattered to her. She'd come down at 6:15 when the common room was empty, except for 2 seventh years sleeping in armchairs who had clearly never made it to their dormitories, found the door, and made her way through 3 corridors and 1 staircase that tried to move on her and didn't get far because she'd already planted her foot correctly. The library opened at 6:30. Madame Pince was already at her desk, and she looked at Hermione with the evaluating gaze of someone assessing whether a newcomer could be trusted in proximity to important things. Hermione looked back at her with the calm of someone who had been navigating her way into adult approval since she was 5 years old and had developed a very reliable method. "First year," Madame Pince said. "Yes, you know the rules about restricted section access." "I do. I won't need it yet." She paused. Probably, Madame Pince's expression did something that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. She gestured at the stacks. "Browsing only until 7:30. Breakfast is at 8. "Thank you," Hermione said and went in. She was back in the common room by 7:15 with 2 books she hadn't expected to find, and a revised mental map of the library's organizational system, which was partially Dewey and partially something entirely its own that she'd worked out the logic of in 45 minutes and found extremely elegant once she had. Harry was sitting by the fire in his uniform with his hair doing what it always did, which was whatever it wanted, eating a piece of toast that he'd apparently conjured from nowhere. "Where did you get toast?" she said. "Asked a house elf near the kitchens on my way back from the bathroom," he said. "There's a portrait of a fruit bowl on the 4th floor if you tickle the pear." "How did you know that?" "Sirius's additions to the map." He handed her half the toast. "Library, obviously." She sat down across from him. "It's extraordinary. The organizational system has an internal logic that I think Madame Pince developed herself. There's no external framework that accounts for the cross-referencing between the charms and transfiguration sections. It's unique to Hermione." "Yes, we have transfiguration at 9. She looked at him. "I know that. Just making sure you knew we also have to eat breakfast in a real room with other people." She picked up her half of the toast. "I'm eating. You're eating and classifying the library simultaneously. It's a lot." "It's efficient," she said, and opened the first of her new books. Harry watched her for a moment with the expression he wore when he was fond of something and too comfortable to bother performing it. Neville came down at 7:30 looking like someone who had fought his way through sleep and won only narrowly, and Harry handed him the other half of his toast without being asked, which Neville accepted with the gratitude of someone who understood gestures. McGonagall's transfiguration classroom smelled like chalk and something electrical and old, and Professor McGonagall herself stood at the front of it like a piece of architecture that had always been there. She was looking at them as they filed in with an expression that could generously be called patient and accurately be called assessing. "Sit," she said. "Tutor desk." Harry sat with Hermione automatically. Neville ended up with Ron Weasley, who had the particular energy of someone who'd grown up in a large family and found being quiet physically challenging. McGonagall set a match on every desk. "By the end of this lesson," she said, "you will transform this match into a needle. By the end of the week you will do it consistently. By the end of term you will do it non-verbally." She paused. "These are my expectations, they are not negotiable." Ron Weasley's hand went up. "Professor, isn't non-verbal transfiguration 3rd year? It is the standard curriculum expectation, Mr. Weasley," McGonagall said. "My expectations are not the standard curriculum." She walked them through the theory first, which Harry followed easily and completely, and Hermione followed while simultaneously writing notes at a speed that suggested she was ahead of the verbal content. Then she explained the wand movement, a specific arcing motion with a pivot at the wrist, and told them to begin. The room filled with the sounds of concentration, whispered incantations, the occasional small crackling sound, someone at the back muttering something that sounded like an argument with themselves. Harry looked at his match. He thought about Remus's voice. Transfiguration is the most intellectually demanding branch of magic because it requires you to hold two contradictory realities in your mind simultaneously, what something is and what you want it to become, and impose your will on the gap between them. He thought match metal, long, sharp at one end. He moved his wand. The match became a needle on the second attempt. Not perfectly, it was still faintly brown at the base, but it was a needle correctly shaped with a working eye. McGonagall appeared at his shoulder. She looked at the needle. She picked it up and held it to the light. Almost entirely correct, she said, setting it back down. The composition is slightly compromised at the base. Do it again. He did it again. The second one was clean. He glanced at Hermione. Her needle was already in McGonagall's hand, and McGonagall was turning it over with an expression that was carefully professional, and underneath it, privately, something else. Miss Granger, she said. Professor, this is correct. Yes, on your first attempt. Second, Hermione said. The first one had the eye in the wrong position. I adjusted. McGonagall set the needle down. Where did you study? Remus Lupin, Hermione said. Primarily. Lily Potter for charms and advanced defensive theory. James Potter for tactical application. Sirius Black for the things they didn't technically cover, Harry said. Practical creativity, Hermione said. McGonagall looked at both of them over her glasses with an expression that was managing several things at once. Then she moved on to Neville's desk, where his match was showing early signs of metallic shimmer, and said something quiet and encouraging that made Neville's posture improve measurably. Across the room, Draco Malfoy was watching Harry's needle with a particular quality of attention. Harry didn't look at him. He turned his third match into a needle, perfectly this time, completely without the brown base, and set it next to the first two and thought about what else he could do with the remaining time. He spent the last 10 minutes quietly trying to do it wordlessly. He got it on the fifth attempt. McGonagall noticed. She was at another desk, but she had the peripheral awareness of someone who had been watching classrooms for decades and missed very little. She came back to his desk and looked at the wordless needle, and then looked at him with the expression of someone making a decision. After class, she said, Professor, I'd like a word. He stayed. Hermione stayed too, because she always did, and because McGonagall looked at both of them in the empty classroom after the other students had filed out with the expression of someone arriving at a professional obligation that was also personally significant. I knew your parents, she said, both sets in one sense or another. Your mother was the finest transfiguration student I've taught in 30 years, Mr. Potter. Your parents, Miss Granger, I was aware of the situation. I am glad, she stopped, she tried again. I am glad you're here, both of you. She said it with the precision of someone who had chosen every word carefully and meant all of them. I expect a great deal from you. You should know that is not a burden but a recognition. We understand, Hermione said. Good. McGonagall straightened. Don't be late to charms. Charms was Professor Flitwick, small and enthusiastic and sharply perceptive beneath the enthusiasm, and Herbology was Professor Sprout, warm and earthy and deeply competent in the way that people were when they genuinely loved their subject. History of Magic was Professor Binns, who was a ghost and delivered information about the giant wars in a monotone that had apparently been unchanged for 50 years, and who was, objectively, the most boring thing Harry had ever experienced. He spent the lesson doing wandless, wordless switching spells with small objects under the desk, partly for practice and partly because his hands needed something to do. Hermione spent it taking comprehensive notes. He's been dead for a century, Ron Weasley said afterward in the corridor with genuine bewilderment. How is he still teaching? Inertia, Harry said. Institutional inertia, it's a real phenomenon. Also, he doesn't realize he's meant to stop, Hermione said. Ron laughed, a genuine, full laugh that had no self-consciousness in it at all. The laugh of someone who'd grown up in a large family that found things funny freely and often. Harry found he liked it immediately, the completeness of it. Ron Weasley was, Harry had decided over the first 2 days, exactly what he looked like. Straightforward, loyal, funnier than he knew, and carrying a particular combination of confidence and uncertainty that came from being the sixth child in a family of exceptional people and still figuring out where he fit. He was very good at chess. He was developing a genuine friendship with Neville built primarily around shared confusion about things Hermione found obvious. He had a complicated relationship with the concept of studying that Hermione was taking personally. You haven't done the charms essay, she told him on Wednesday evening in the common room. It's not due until Friday, Ron said. It's due Friday, which means if you start now you have 2 days to do it well versus starting Friday morning and doing it rushed. Or I start Thursday night and do it fine. Define fine. Acceptable. The margin between acceptable and good is 40 minutes of additional work, Hermione said. That's a small investment for a meaningfully better outcome. Ron looked at her, then he looked at Harry. Does she do this to you? She's been doing it to me since I was 1, Harry said. You get used to it. Also, she's right, which makes it harder to argue. Ron looked back at Hermione with an expression of someone revising their position, which Hermione received with the equanimity of someone who was used to being right and no longer needed to perform triumph about it. Fine, Ron said, but if I do the essay now I want to know how you did that thing in Transfiguration where McGonagall's face went weird. Which thing? Harry said. The wordless one with the third match. Non-verbal transfiguration. Ron stared at him. That's third year. Fourth year, technically, Hermione said. The formal curriculum introduction, but the technique isn't actually grade-level dependent. The curriculum just places it there because most students haven't built the concentration foundations before then. We started non-verbal practice at 8, Harry said. Ron continued to stare at them with an expression that was navigating towards something between awe and indignation. My mum taught me Wingardium Leviosa when I was 7 and that was considered early. Your mum's brilliant, Hermione said. By all accounts, this landed correctly. Ron's face changed. Yeah, he said, she is. The non-verbal thing is mostly concentration, Harry said. It's not a special ability, it's just practice. I can show you the mental approach if you want. After the essay, Hermione said. After the essay, Harry agreed. Ron opened his bag and got out his parchment with the expression of someone who had lost an argument and was making peace with it. Neville arrived from the dormitory with his own essay half-written and the look of someone who'd been struggling with the second section. Hermione slid her notes toward him without being asked, pointing at the relevant paragraph. The common room filled up around them, other students doing their own work or talking or playing Exploding Snap in the corner that seemed designated for Exploding Snap by long tradition, and Harry sat in the warm noise of it and worked through his own essay with one hand and thought about the week with the other half of his attention. It had been not what he expected exactly, because he'd known enough to expect something nuanced. It had been something with texture to it. Hogwarts was real in the way that very complex things were real, layered, sometimes contradictory, full of people who each had their own entire interior world going on that had nothing to do with him or his name. He liked that. He'd worried privately before arrival that it would be like being a symbol walking around in a school, that people would always be looking. And some of them were. He'd caught it, the glances, the nudges, the whispered "that's Harry Potter" in corridors. But mostly, once the first day was through, people seemed to recalibrate. He was a student. He sat in classes and asked questions and did assignments. He was normal in all the ways that mattered, and that normalness seemed slowly to override the mythology. Draco Malfoy was the exception. It was Thursday before the first real confrontation, and it happened in the one place Harry hadn't fully anticipated, flying. Madame Hooch ran the flying lesson on the grounds with the broom command Wingardium Leviosa efficiency of someone who'd done it 800 times, and the first years assembled on the grass, with the mixture of nerves and excitement that came from being about to do something new. Harry had flown before. James had put him on a broom at age 3, which had been Lily's objection, and at 5 he'd been flying independently, and at 8 Sirius had introduced him to Quidditch with the evangelical fervor of a true convert. He knew how to fly the way he knew how to breathe. It was just in him, some combination of the physical intuition that James had passed on and his own relationship with speed. He stood next to his broom and waited for Madame Hooch's instruction, keeping his face neutral and his energy quiet, because showing off in flying was the same as showing off in any other context, and he'd been specifically told by Sirius, who knew about these things from extensive personal experience, that the best approach to having a skill was to demonstrate it when it was useful rather than when it was impressive. Up, he said. The broom came up. Madame Hooch walked the line. Most brooms came up on the 3rd or 4th command. Hermione's came up on the 2nd. She'd taken it as an academic problem and solved it, which was her approach to everything physical. Neville's tried to go sideways, which Neville managed with the focused determination of someone who had decided that today's challenge was brooms. Draco's broom came up on the 1st command, and he let everyone know he'd noticed, and he was doing the look, the "I already know something about you" look, when Neville's broom made its second sideways attempt and this time actually succeeded. What happened next was quick, and then suddenly not quick. Neville was rising, not intentionally, not under control, gripping the broom handle with both hands, getting higher while everyone on the ground watched with the frozen attention of a group that hadn't yet processed the situation into action. Neville's face was white. His hands were locked. The broom climbed and tilted. Something went past Harry, a small, round thing, glass, and fell, hit the ground and shattered. A remembrall, he registered. Someone had brought a remembrall to flying lessons, and it had come off Neville's wrist and it had shattered. And Draco was walking over to the broken pieces with an expression of interest that was actually contempt, wearing interest as a mask. "Oh look," Draco said to Crabbe and Goyle, who were the architectural boys from the train. Poor Longbottoms dropped his little ball. Harry wasn't listening. He was watching Neville, who was 50 feet up and climbing. He said quietly, "Madame Hooch, I see him," she said, and she was already moving, but she had her wand out and angle mattered, and the spell she was preparing would bring the broom down fast, and a broom coming down fast at 50 feet was its own kind of problem. Harry put his foot on his broom. He was in the air before he'd made a conscious decision, which was exactly how Sirius had described it. The broom doesn't think, you think after. The good flyers act first and reason catches up. He was up and moving, climbing fast, getting above and to the side of Neville's broom so that when he leveled next to it he had control of the approach angle. Neville looked at him with enormous eyes. "Listen to me," Harry said, clearly conversationally as if they were at ground level. "You're going to slowly let your right hand shift down the handle, not much, 2 inches. When you do, the broom will tilt toward me and I'll stabilize it. Okay?" "I'm very high up," Neville said. "I know, 2 inches, right hand." Neville moved his right hand 2 inches down the handle. The broom tilted. Harry moved alongside it and put his hand on the back end, and for a moment it was the broom's momentum against his grip, and then it wasn't, it settled, and he had it, and Neville had both hands and was stable, and they were descending together, controlled. When they landed, Madame Hooch was at the ground with an expression that was several things layered: relief and assessment and something else. The first years were very quiet. "Thank you," Neville said quietly. He looked a little shaky, but fundamentally all right. "You did the hard part," Harry said, moving the hand. "That wasn't the hard part." "I know," Harry said. "Good job anyway." Madame Hooch looked at Harry with the evaluative precision of someone who had seen a great deal of flying in her career and was reclassifying what she'd just watched. "Where did you learn to fly, Mr. Potter?" "My father," Harry said. "And Sirius Black." "Sirius Black." She said it with the tone of someone encountering a name that explained a great many things. "Right." She looked around at the assembled first years. "Everyone back to position. We're doing the controlled ascent exercise." Draco Malfoy said from behind Harry. "That was a bit show-offy, don't you think?" Harry turned around. He looked at Draco, really looked at him, the way he'd learned from Lily to look at things when he wanted to understand them. He saw a boy who was genuinely talented, genuinely intelligent, genuinely competitive, and who had just watched something happen that didn't fit the order he'd been raised to expect and didn't know what to do with that except dismiss it. "Neville was going to fall," Harry said. "Madame Hooch had it handled. Possibly the spell would have brought him down fast from 50 feet. I didn't like those odds." He paused. "Also, you broke his remembrall." "I didn't touch it. You walked toward it while he was in the air," Harry said. "You picked it up." He'd seen it from the ground. "What did you do with it?" Draco's jaw tightened. "Draco," Harry said, and his voice was even and not unkind and completely without give. "What did you do with it?" A beat. Then Draco reached into his robe pocket and held out the remembrall. It was intact, it hadn't shattered, it had rolled. Draco had picked it up, not broken it. Harry took it, turned to Neville, handed it over. Neville took it and held it and didn't say anything. Harry looked back at Draco. "Thanks for keeping it safe," he said, and left Draco with that. He heard Hermione make a small sound behind him that meant she'd seen all of it and was filing it. He glanced at her as he got back to his broom. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said, "just watching." "And you're going to be Quidditch captain someday," she said. "I'm making a prediction. I'm 11. I'm aware I'm still making the prediction." The owl came on Saturday. It arrived during breakfast with the composed authority of the school owl they knew. Harry recognized it from the Hogwarts letters, and it landed directly in front of him and held out its leg with the professionalism of something on official business. McGonagall's handwriting: "Brief, Mr. Potter, please come to my office at 11 this morning. There is a matter I wish to discuss regarding Gryffindor's Quidditch team." Harry passed it to Hermione. She read it. "I told you," she said. "You told me I'd be captain someday, not that I'd be on the team at 11. It's adjacent to being right." McGonagall's office was austere and organized and had an entire wall of books that suggested she had a private intellectual life that most students never saw. She was standing at the window when Harry arrived, and she turned and looked at him with the expression she wore when she was being professionally committed to something against a background of personal feeling. "I'll be direct," she said. "I've spoken with Madame Hooch about what happened Thursday. It was pretty simple. It was remarkable flying." She said it like she was reading from a report, which made it more convincing than flattery would have. "Your father was," she stopped, tried again. "James Potter was the finest natural flyer I ever put on a Quidditch team. What I watched on Thursday suggests you've inherited that and more." "He taught me well," Harry said. "He did. The question I have for you is whether you want to play. The position of Seeker opened this year. Oliver Wood is rebuilding the team and he needs one urgently. You'd be the youngest player Gryffindor has fielded in a century." She looked at him steadily. "This isn't an obligation. I want you to choose it if it's something you actually want." Harry thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. "Yes," he said. "Good." McGonagall's expression did the thing it had done in Transfiguration class, the private quality, the one underneath the professional surface. "Your father would be," she stopped herself again with the discipline of someone who'd decided how emotional they were going to be and intended to hold the line. "I'll tell him in my letter tonight," Harry said. "He'll be unbearable." McGonagall's mouth moved. "I expect he will," she said. "You may go, Mr. Potter." Old Hermione on the way back to the common room. She listened without interrupting, which was her mode for information she'd predicted and therefore found confirmed. "What position?" she said. "Seeker." "Good, that's the right one for you. Because of the flying, because Seekers have to see the whole picture while everyone else is watching the quaffle. It's a thinking position." She looked sideways at him. "Also, you have very good peripheral vision. You've assessed my peripheral vision in defense practice." "Remus noted it. I noted that Remus noted it." Harry shook his head. "You're cataloguing me." "I catalogue everything," she said. "Don't take it personally." "I really don't," he said. The Halloween feast was the first time Harry understood what it meant to be at Hogwarts on a specific date. He'd known the date all his life, not with dread, but with awareness. His parents had made sure of that, not by making it heavy, but by being honest about it, talking about it the way you talked about any significant thing, so that its weight was real but not crushing. Every year on October 31st, James made a full breakfast and they sat together, all of them, and talked about it, not always in depth, sometimes just by being in the same room. This year he was in the Great Hall with orange light and levitating pumpkins and an 8-course feast and the noise of 7 years of students, and it felt different being here in this place that was part of the geography of that night. He was fine. He was genuinely fine, he'd checked. Hermione sat beside him and was quiet in the way she was when she was paying attention to him without drawing attention to the fact that she was paying attention to him. "I'm okay," he said. "I know," she said. "I can tell. Then why are you doing the thing?" "I'm not doing a thing, I'm sitting here." "You're sitting here at me. That's not a grammatically, you know what I mean." She turned to look at him directly. Her expression was the open one, the one without the professional detachment she sometimes wore like armor. "It's October 31st, she said. "We're allowed to be aware of that." "Yeah," he said. "We are." A pause. "Do you miss them?" he asked. "Today?" She didn't have to ask who he meant. "Every day," she said. "Not always painfully, sometimes just," she looked at her plate, "just aware of the gap, the place where they'd have been." Harry reached over and briefly put his hand on hers. She let him. "Lily says grief changes shape," he said. "It doesn't get smaller, it just changes shape and you get stronger and so it becomes manageable," Hermione said. "Yes, she told me too. Multiple times." Repeats things she really means. The doors to the Great Hall burst open. Professor Quirrell came through them at a run, which was alarming not just because Quirrell ran like someone whose body was protesting the experience, but because his face was the white of someone who had genuinely forgotten how to do anything except say what he was saying. "Troll in the dungeon, thought you ought to know," he fainted. The hall erupted. Dumbledore's voice cut through it like a blade, calm, total, immediate. "Prefects, escort your houses to the dormitories. Remain there until instructed. Teachers," his eyes moved around the staff table, each contact specific, "with me." The student body moved. The prefects were already up, Percy Weasley with his badge catching the candlelight and his voice projecting over the noise with the authority of someone who had been waiting his whole life to use it effectively in an emergency. The Gryffindors were filing out through the far door. Harry was in the stream of students when Hermione grabbed his arm. "Girls' bathroom," she said. "Second floor. I was in there before the feast and I heard something that might have been the troll. I didn't think. He didn't need the rest. Go tell McGonagall, she's with Dumbledore." Hermione's eyes were very clear. Harry, he already knew what she was going to say. It was the same calculation he was doing. If the troll had been heading for the second-floor bathroom when Quirrell saw it, if it hadn't been caught yet, if it was moving in that direction, "Go," he said. "I'm right behind you." They broke from the student stream before Percy could clock them, moving fast in the opposite direction through a side corridor while the main Gryffindor column kept moving. Harry pulled the Marauders' map out of his pocket as they ran. "Second-floor east corridor," he said. "Then right, bathrooms at the end." "I know where the bathroom is," she said. "I was just in it." Right, the troll was in the bathroom. They knew it before they opened the door because they could smell it, the rank, thick smell of something enormous that had never encountered soap, and they could hear it, slow, heavy footsteps and the crash of something stone or ceramic meeting the floor. Harry stopped Hermione at the door with a hand on her shoulder. The map showed a single large mass moving in the bathroom, nothing else. "It's alone," he said. "Okay." She was thinking fast. He could see it, the rapid processing. "Knock back Jinx to disrupt its balance if we can get it on the ground. Weight ratio's wrong," he said. "It's 12 feet if it's an inch. Knockback won't do enough. Confundus to disorient it then. Better, combined with something for the legs. Impedimenta, if it can't walk toward us we can maintain range." "Good, I'll take Confundus, you take Impedimenta." Together. They pushed the door open. The troll was the most purely alarming thing Harry had ever seen in person. 12 feet was actually an underestimate. It was closer to 13, grey-green and massive, and carrying a club that had been a tree recently enough that it still had bark on it. It was turning in the bathroom with the thoughtless, enormous momentum of something that didn't understand the concept of obstacles, smashing sinks from the wall as it turned. It saw them. It looked at them for a moment with the small eyes of a creature that used size instead of intelligence. Then it raised its club. "Confundo," Harry said, not shouted, just said, clear and complete and precise while pointing his wand at the troll's face. Impedimenta, Hermione's spell hit the troll's left leg at the same moment. The Confundus hit the troll in the face and its expression went briefly from aggression to something unfocused and confused. It stopped mid-swing, its club arm slowing. The Impedimenta slowed its leg and the combination of momentum and sudden leg failure meant it didn't fall but it lurched dramatically to the left, and its club hit the opposite wall instead of the floor where they'd been standing. The troll shook its head. The Confundus was temporary, 12 seconds, maybe 15. "Again," Harry said. "Impedimenta." Hermione hit the right leg this time. The troll went down. Not fully, it caught itself on one massive hand, but both legs were sluggish now, the charm stacking, and it was on one knee and confused, and its club had bounced from its grip and was rolling toward the far wall. The bathroom door slammed open behind them. McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell came in, wands drawn, and stopped. The troll was on one knee with its club across the bathroom, still trying to reorient through the confundus. Harry and Hermione stood between it and the door with their wands up. McGonagall looked at the troll, she looked at Harry, she looked at Hermione. "Minerva," Snape said in the voice he used when something had gone outside the parameters of his expectations. It was a different voice than his usual one, less certain. McGonagall took 3 steps into the bathroom and put the troll fully down with a stunning spell that hit it between the eyes. It crashed to the floor like a building collapsing. The floor cracked, she turned to face them. Harry prepared himself for the speech about danger and rule-breaking and conduct unbecoming. He'd heard variations on this speech from Remus, who gave it gently but thoroughly, and from James, who gave it while clearly proud, which was more complicated. McGonagall looked at them for a very long moment. "That," she said, "was extraordinarily dangerous and absolutely outside the bounds of what you should have been doing. You are 11 years old. Should have been in your dormitory." She paused. "You are both aware of that?" "Yes, Professor," they said. "Miss Granger, you were in the bathroom before the feast. You had reason to believe the troll may have entered through this corridor." "Yes, Professor, which is why you came to warn Mr. Potter instead of a teacher." Hermione's jaw tightened slightly. "The teachers were with the headmaster. I couldn't reach them quickly enough. And so the two of you, we confunded it and slowed its legs," Harry said. "Maintained distance, didn't approach the club. We had a plan before we went in." McGonagall looked at Snape. Snape looked at the unconscious troll. His expression was the one Harry had been learning to read over the past 2 months, the one that meant he was processing something he hadn't predicted. "How," Snape said, and his voice was quieter than usual, "did you confund something at that size and have it hold for long enough to be useful?" "Precision over power," Harry said. "You don't need to overwhelm a large target. You need to hit the right spot with complete accuracy. The confundus affects cognition at the center point. If you get the forehead contact clean, size is mostly irrelevant." Snape stared at him. "Your mother," he said finally, and then stopped and didn't finish the sentence. "I'll take 15 points each," McGonagall said, "for leaving the column against prefect instruction." "Professor," Harry started. "And 15 points each back," she said, "for the presence of mind to address the situation effectively and prevent significant damage to school property, and more to the point, to yourselves." She looked at them steadily. "Do not make a habit of this, Mr. Potter. Miss Granger, do you understand me?" "Completely," Hermione said. "Yes, Professor," Harry said. McGonagall turned back to deal with the troll. Snape lingered just for a moment and looked at Harry with the expression that wasn't quite hostility and wasn't quite anything else. The complicated look that Harry had been trying to decode since the first week of term. The one that seemed to see something every time it landed on him that it didn't know what to do with. Then Snape left. Quirrell, who had stood by the door throughout, looking at the troll with the expression of someone who found the whole situation deeply distressing, left directly behind him. Harry and Hermione walked back to Gryffindor Tower in the quiet of the late-night castle, the Halloween decorations still burning in the corridors around them. 15 points each," Hermione said. "And 15 back," Harry said. "Net zero." "Net zero," he agreed. She was quiet for a moment. "Then that confundus was very good. Yours hit both legs sequentially in under 4 seconds, he said. "Different charm, different target, overlapping intervals. We didn't practice that. We didn't need to." He glanced at her. "We just knew." She looked ahead at the corridor. "Yes," she said, and he could hear in that single syllable everything she wasn't elaborating on, all the years of practice and structure and the family that had built them, all of it arriving in a moment in a bathroom with a troll and working exactly as intended. They came through the portrait hole into the common room where everyone was still awake and nervous and waiting, and Ron looked up from the corner where he'd been sitting with his arms around his knees and said, "Where were you?" "We thought troll," Harry said. "We dealt with it," Hermione said. Ron stared at them. "You," he looked at the common room, at the other students back at them. "The whole school was hiding in their dormitories." "Most of the school," Harry said. Ron let out a long breath that was half laugh and half something else. Then he shook his head. "Right," he said. "Right, okay." He looked at them with the expression that Harry would come to associate with Ron at his most genuine, with the armor off, genuine feeling undisguised. "You're both mad, you know that?" "Probably," Harry said. Neville from the armchair by the fire said quietly, "I'm glad you're all right." "So are we," Hermione said. She looked at him, then at the room. Then she sat down by the fire with the composure of someone who was tired and wasn't going to show it. Harry dropped into the armchair across from Neville and felt the full weight of the day settle onto him. The feast, the troll, the map, the split-second calculation in the corridor, McGonagall's face, and underneath all of it still the awareness that it was October 31st and his parents were alive and he was here, and everything that had almost been otherwise was instead like this. He was enormously, quietly grateful for that. Outside, the Halloween night pressed against the windows of Gryffindor Tower, and the enchanted decorations burned amber in the corridors, and the castle settled into its late-night silence. He let himself feel the gratitude all the way through without shortening it. Then he picked up his charms homework. Chapter 4, What the Mirror Wants. December arrived at Hogwarts the way it always did, suddenly and completely, as if the castle had been waiting for permission to become itself in winter. Snow came overnight on the 1st of the month, and by morning the grounds were buried and the lake was a steel-grey mirror, and the forest at the edge of everything was dark against all that white. The inside of the castle answered with fires in every grate burning higher, and the enchanted ceiling of the great hall showing the real sky above, which was the specific blue-grey of a deep cold day, and the whole place smelled like wood smoke and pine and the particular warmth of a very old building that had been keeping people alive through winters for 1,000 years. Harry noticed it on the way to breakfast, the way the castle changed quality in winter, became more itself, more present. He stood on the landing of the fourth-floor staircase for a moment and looked out through the narrow window at the grounds below, at the footprints already appearing in the snow where Hagrid had made his early morning rounds, at the smoke rising from the gamekeeper's hut, at the black line of the forbidden forest. He thought about the stone. He'd been thinking about it with increasing frequency for 3 weeks. It had started with Hagrid, who had the quality of a person who couldn't lie effectively because he cared too much about the people he was talking to, and his face gave everything away. Over a term of visits to the hut, Harry and Hermione had gone regularly, first out of genuine liking for Hagrid, and then because Hagrid was the kind of company that made you feel like the world was fundamentally all right. They'd collected information without trying to. The Norwegian Ridgeback egg in November had been Hagrid's, spectacularly illegal and proudly named Norbert. Before that, the vault at Gringotts emptied the same day they'd visited Diagon Alley, the dog on the 3rd floor. The name Nicholas Flamel said quickly and then immediately retracted, which was the kind of thing that Harry's particular instincts flagged and catalogued. It was Hermione who put it together first. She'd come to breakfast on a Tuesday in mid-November with a copy of Great Alchemists of the 20th Century and put it open to a specific page without saying anything and waited for Harry to read it. He'd read it, then he'd looked up. The Philosopher's Stone, he'd said. Hidden in the school, she'd said. That's what's on the 3rd floor, that's why the vault was emptied. And you think it's at risk? I think someone thinks it is, she'd said. Dumbledore clearly thought it needed moving. The question is whether moving it here was sufficient. They'd sat with that for a while. Quirrell, Harry had said. She'd nodded very slightly. I've been watching him. So have I, he'd thought about it. He's frightened all the time, but not of the students, not of the workload. He's frightened in a direction like something has a hold on him. Yes, she'd said, exactly that. They'd told no one. Not because they were keeping secrets from Ron or Neville. Ron had noticed Quirrell's odd quality too, and Neville had said once very quietly that defense class made him feel cold in a way that the dungeons didn't, which was interesting and not nothing. But Harry wanted to understand it fully before involving more people, because understanding a problem completely before acting on it was one of the things Remus had drilled into him more consistently than anything else. Don't move until you can see the whole board, Remus had said so many times it had become reflex. Action without understanding is just energy with no direction. He turned from the window and went to breakfast. Hermione had written to Lily. Not about the stone, she'd written about the stone in a separate letter in a private cipher she and Lily had developed when Hermione was 9, which Harry couldn't read and wasn't supposed to, and which Lily would understand and respond to in kind. She'd also written a normal letter because she wrote to Lily twice a week regardless, and Lily wrote back with the reliability of a natural law. The letters came at breakfast. Lily's handwriting was distinctive, sharp, slanted, entirely confident, and the letter was 3 pages on the small parchment, which was average length. Hermione read it between bites of toast with the focused attention she gave to everything Lily wrote. There was a paragraph about the confundus and impedimenta combination that Lily had clearly gotten from McGonagall's letter to James, because Lily wrote, I heard about your Halloween and I have several things to say, the first being that you were right about the distance and the precision, and the second being that if you do anything like that again, without at least attempting to reach an adult first, I will personally write a letter to McGonagall that makes this term very educational for both of you. There was a postscript that said, P.S. The confundus at that precision range at your age is exceptional. Don't tell Harry I said that last part, tell him I said the first part twice. She showed Harry the postscript. She told you to tell me she said the first part twice, he said. I know, but the second part is true and you should know it. She folded the letter. She also says your father has been unbearable about the Quidditch position and Sirius has bet Remus 5 galleons you'll catch the snitch in the first match. What does Remus think? That you'll catch it, but there's no need to involve galleons in the prediction. Harry smiled into his porridge. Classic. The letter from James was separately attached and was mostly about Quidditch strategy and also contained a drawing. James was a terrible artist of what appeared to be Harry on a broomstick catching something that was either a snitch or a small golden star. Underneath it, James had written "THAT's going to be you" and underlined it 3 times. Harry folded that letter very carefully and put it in his inside pocket. The first Quidditch match was the first week of December, and the morning of it Harry woke before everyone else and lay in the dark and felt the specific quality of pre-match nerves which were different from regular nerves. Regular nerves were about uncertainty. Pre-match nerves were about anticipation, the body getting ready for something it already knew how to do. He wasn't afraid of flying. He wasn't afraid of the game. He was keenly, electrically ready for both. Wood gave the pre-match speech in the changing room with the intensity of someone who took Quidditch the way Hermione took academic problems, completely seriously, completely personally, completely prepared. Harry listened to all of it and retained the strategic information and filed the emotional content as motivational context. Potter, Wood said before they went out. You find the snitch, that's it, don't worry about anything else. I know, Harry said. The Slytherin seeker is Terence Higgs. He's experienced, he plays physical. I know, he'll try to block your sight lines. Wood, Harry met his eyes, I've got it. Wood looked at him, then he nodded once, the nod of someone who actually believed what he'd just been told, which was its own kind of compliment. They flew out into the cold air and the roar of the crowd. The Quidditch pitch in winter was something else. The cold cut through robes regardless of the warming charms, and the sky was that particular deep grey that made colours more vivid against it. The red of Gryffindor robes, the green of Slytherin, the gold and white and dark leather of the pitch itself. The stands were packed, the noise enormous, and somewhere in there were Hermione and Ron and Neville, and further up in the teacher section McGonagall sitting with the uprightness of someone determined not to show investment, and Dumbledore with his silver beard and his expression of benign attention. And Quirrell. Harry noticed Quirrell in the stands because Harry had been watching Quirrell for weeks. He filed it and flew. Madame Hooch released the balls. The snitch flickered gold for a half-second near the central post and then vanished. Harry climbed. He flew the way he'd been trained to fly, not chasing the snitch but occupying the space that let him see the most of the pitch simultaneously. He developed this with James over years, the principle of position over pursuit. The seeker who chased was always a second behind. The seeker who positioned was always where the snitch needed to be caught. He watched Higgs. Higgs was good, experienced, as Wood had said, and he played with the confidence of someone who'd had years of advantage. But Higgs was a chaser, fundamentally. He played the snitch the way a chaser played the quaffle, pursuing, reacting. Harry read this inside the first 3 minutes. The match went on. Gryffindor scored twice through the chasers. Katie Bell threw a gap in the Slytherin defense. The crowd noise was a physical thing, wave and counterwave. Harry's broom shuddered. It wasn't a mechanical failure. He knew the feel of his broom completely, its particular responses, its way of handling crosswind. This was something else. The broom moved under him like something had taken hold of it, a convulsive sideways jerk that he corrected on instinct, and then it happened again. He held on. Below him he heard the crowd change note, the shift from game noise to alarm noise, people standing in the Gryffindor stands. He heard Hermione's voice somewhere with the specific precision of someone identifying a problem and moving to solve it. The broom tried to throw him a third time. He locked his legs, tightened his grip, kept his eyes on the pitch. Don't react to the problem, manage the situation. He was still 150 feet up and the broom was fighting him, but he had it, barely keeping it level through continuous correction, the way you steered a boat in rough water. Something changed below. A small fire appeared in the stands, not dangerous, contained, brief, and whatever had hold of his broom released. The broom went still. Harry breathed. In the moment of stillness, a flash of gold near the Slytherin goalposts. He was moving before he'd decided to move, dropping out of his holding position into a dive that was nearly vertical, the stands blurring past, the green of the pitch rising fast, and Higgs saw him going and tried to cut across but was too far out of position, too far behind the geometry of where Harry already was. Harry opened his hand. The snitch hit his palm with a tiny, perfect impact. The roar that went up from the Gryffindor stands was the loudest thing he'd ever heard. He pulled out of the dive 20 feet from the ground, leveling smoothly, and rose back up with the snitch held between his fingers and looked at the sky and felt the cold air on his face and the vibration of thousands of people making noise and thought, clearly and without any performance, yes, this is exactly right. In the stands, Hermione was watching Quirrell. He'd seen the fire she'd set Snape's robes, briefly, deliberately, because she'd done the math and Snape's eyes had been on Harry and his lips had been moving, and she'd seen it hadn't been Snape at all because the fire hadn't broken the jinx. The jinx had broken when Quirrell stumbled into someone behind him and lost his concentration. She sat down in the noise of the celebration with this information and turned it over carefully. She'd been wrong about who. She hadn't been wrong about what. She told Harry that night in the common room after everyone else had gone to bed, with the fire burning low and the celebration noise long faded, and just the two of them in the good chairs with their legs up and the castle quiet around them. Harry listened without interrupting. This was one of the things she valued most about him. He let you finish, let you get all the way to the end of the thought before he responded, which meant when he did respond it was to what you'd actually said rather than what he'd expected you to say. When she finished, he said, "Quirrell, Quirrell," she said, not just frightened, actively working for someone. "Voldemort," Harry said, not a question. "It fits," she said. The pattern of Quirrell's behavior, the timing of the Gringotts break-in, what your parents told us about Voldemort's state after Godric's Hollow, fragmented, desperate, needing a physical host or a tether to work through. Quirrell would be the perfect person, Harry said slowly. Quiet, overlooked, already at Hogwarts, already positioned near whatever he needed. Near the stone, Hermione said. Harry was quiet for a moment. The fire cracked and shifted. We need to write to my parents, he said. I already did, she said. The cipher, Lily will know what I'm saying. When did you send it? During the match. She paused. I had Ron take the owl while I was. She looked at her hands while I was dealing with the other thing. Harry looked at her for a moment. The robes. I was wrong about who, she said. I set fire to the wrong person. Snape's fine, Harry said. That's not entirely the point. Hermione. His voice was even. You assessed the situation under pressure with incomplete information and you acted to protect me. You got the target wrong but the action was correct. Something had the broom and you disrupted it. That's not failure, that's good enough. Good enough is not my standard, she said. I know, but good enough kept me on the broom. He looked at her until she met his eyes. Thank you. She held his gaze for a moment, then she looked back at the fire. You're welcome, she said, and it came out quieter than she'd intended. We tell Ron and Neville, Harry said. Ron's already suspicious about Quirrell. And Neville sees things, Harry said. Quietly, he's been seeing things all term, he just doesn't always have the framework to name them. He paused. He has the framework, he just doesn't trust it yet. Hermione looked at him. When did you work that out? Halloween, he said. In the bathroom. The way he steadied on the broom when I told him exactly what to do. He looked at the fire. He doesn't need someone to do things for him, he needs someone to tell him his read is right, his instincts are good, his confidence isn't there yet. Hermione was quiet for a moment, then you're quite good at people. Dad's version of potions, he said, understanding what someone needs. He told you that. He told me that after I'd figured it out, which is very him. She almost smiled. December deepened. Most students went home for Christmas and the castle went quieter, more itself, the way places became more themselves with fewer people in them. Harry and Hermione stayed. It wasn't a difficult decision. They talked about it briefly with James and Lily, and James had said stay if you want to, we'll come for a few days in the new year, and Lily had said the castle at Christmas is something worth experiencing, and that had been all they needed. Ron stayed too, cheerfully, because the twins were staying for their own reasons, and Ron didn't mind Hogwarts at Christmas, and it turned out he and Harry had developed the particular easy comfort of people who were the same kind of straightforward. Neville went home. Before he left, he pressed a small tin of homemade fudge into Harry's hands and told him his grandmother had sent it and he hadn't eaten it and Harry should have it. And Harry took it and said thank you, and Neville went down to the carriages with his trunk and Hermione called after him. Neville, he turned. Your herbology essay was excellent, she said. Sprout mentioned it. Neville stood for a moment with the fudge tin's twin, and the information she'd just given him and his expression was the one Harry had come to recognize as Neville adding something to a very small and carefully guarded collection of things he believed about himself. She said that, he said. I don't invent compliments, Hermione said. Neville's face did something warm and quiet. All right, he said. Happy Christmas, he went. Christmas Eve brought the snow inside somehow, or near inside, the windows frosting at the edges, the enchanted decorations throughout the castle cycling through 12-foot trees and floating candles, and the intermittent appearance of something that might have been snow inside but was actually a charm that gave the visual impression without the wet, which was its own kind of magic. Harry woke Christmas morning to a pile of presents at the end of his bed. James had sent a Quidditch commentary set, a small enchanted device that would give live commentary on any match he listened to, which was a spectacularly specific gift and therefore perfect. Sirius had sent a letter that was mostly just a play-by-play of watching the Quidditch match in the owlery mirror he'd set up to watch from home, told with such performative enthusiasm that Harry laughed 3 times reading it. Remus had sent a book and a note that said, I know you'll read it. I know she already has. Read it anyway, and there was one wrapped parcel with no note. Very light, something inside it that shifted like cloth. He unwrapped it. Inside was a cloak, silver grey with a shimmer that wasn't quite right, that moved when the cloth was still, that caught light in a way that no ordinary fabric could. He picked it up and it flowed over his hands, and where it fell across them, his hands disappeared. He looked at it for a long time. He knew what an invisibility cloak was. He knew that James had had one. He'd known it was lost somewhere in the events of 1981. James had mentioned it vaguely, hadn't known where it ended up after Godric's Hollow. He put it on. He looked down at the space where he should be. Then he crossed to the window and looked at the grounds below in the Christmas morning snow, at the world going on with no idea he was standing there, and he felt something that wasn't quite power but was adjacent to it, the feeling of existing in the world with the option of being unseen, not disappearing, just choosing. He put it away carefully. He'd need it. It was the cloak 3 days after Christmas that took him to the mirror. The library was accessible over the holidays with a bit of creativity, and the library was where Harry had started spending evenings, following the thread of the stone, secondary sources on Nicholas Flamel's work, alchemical theory, the history of magical objects classified as extraordinarily dangerous. Hermione had found the restricted section entries she wanted. She'd gotten Quirrell to sign a permission slip, which she'd found satisfying in a specific dark way, and was working through them with systematic efficiency. Harry had wandered. He'd been under the cloak, moving through the castle at an hour when he technically shouldn't have been, not for any bad purpose, just because the castle at midnight felt like a separate place from the castle in daylight, older and more honest, and he'd been doing this since the second week of term in small doses because it helped him think. He turned a corner on the 4th floor and stopped. The room was there, it shouldn't have been there. He'd been through this corridor a dozen times. There was no room on the left side after the fourth pillar, there was wall, stone, unmistakable. And now there was a door. He stood outside it for a moment, then he went in. The room was long and dimly lit and cold in a specific way that wasn't the winter cold of the corridors. It was empty except for the mirror. The mirror was tall, taller than the doorway it had apparently come through, which was interesting, with an ornate gold frame carved with words that ran around the top edge. Eris stra eruoit ube cafruoit on wosi. Old script, familiar from somewhere. He read it, reversed it in his head automatically. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He stood in front of it. He didn't know exactly what he expected. James and Lily, maybe. Some sentimental picture of what could have been, the life that almost wasn't. Or maybe something about the stone, some indication of what he needed to find. He looked at the mirror. What he saw was himself, exactly himself, same untidy hair, same glasses, same slight build, same scar. But the reflection looked out at him with a quality of expression that the real Harry looking in didn't have, a calm so deep it was almost gravity, an absolute, unshakable certainty of self. A stillness underneath all the movement that Harry recognized but couldn't quite access at will, not yet. The reflection held something in its open palm, small and red, a gemstone or a glass bead catching light. And standing around the reflected Harry were shapes, not specific faces, not people he could name, but the clear impression of people. A crowd, not watching him perform for them, standing with him, facing the same direction. He looked at it for a long time. Interesting, said a voice behind him. He turned. Dumbledore was sitting in a chair against the far wall that Harry was almost completely certain had not been there when he came in. He was in a dressing gown that managed to be elaborate even as nightwear, and he was looking at Harry with the expression that Harry had come to identify as Dumbledore at his most actually honest, which was different from Dumbledore's general expression in specific small ways. Harry pulled back the cloak. I thought you might find it eventually, Dumbledore said. You're rather your father's son in the matter of nighttime wandering. How long have you been there? Harry asked. Long enough. He looked at the mirror. What did you see? Harry considered whether to be honest. He decided yes, not because he thought Dumbledore was owed honesty automatically, but because this particular question seemed to deserve a real answer. Myself, he said. Future version, maybe calmer. And people around me, not specific people, just, he thought about how to say it. The people I'd fight for, the ones who'd be there because they chose to be, not because of my name. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Not your parents. I don't need the mirror to show me my parents, Harry said. They're alive, I know what they look like. Many who have lost parents come to stand in front of this mirror for hours, Dumbledore said gently. It is one of the mirror's cruelties to make people prisoners of what they most deeply want, unable to look away. I can look away, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Yes, he said, I can see that. There was something in his expression, not quite surprise, but the recalibration that Harry recognized, the same thing he'd seen in McGonagall, in Snape, in Madame Hooch, the readjustment of expectation. Most people cannot. The mirror shows you something you don't have, Harry said. The thing I want most. He looked at the mirror, at the calm, reflected version of himself, at the people standing alongside that reflection. That's a future I can build. It's not something I'm missing. It's something I'm working toward. The mirror can't trap you with something that's possible if you're willing to do the work. Dumbledore was very still. That, he said slowly, is a remarkably sophisticated understanding of a magical object for someone your age. Remus explained the mirror during our second year of education with him, Harry said. He wanted me to understand what it was before I ever encountered it, so that if I did, I wouldn't lose time to it. Dumbledore looked at him, then he did something Harry didn't expect. He smiled, the genuine version, not the public one. Remus Lupin is a remarkable teacher, he said. The best, Harry said without hesitation. Dumbledore rose from the chair, which disappeared as he did. The mirror will be moved tomorrow, he said. I had it brought here for a purpose that has largely been served. I'd ask you not to come looking for it. He paused. I suspect you won't need to. Harry looked at Dumbledore. He thought about the stone, about Quirrell, about the chamber on the third floor and the three-headed dog and the line of traps beneath it that he and Hermione had been mapping from theory and architectural logic and what they could infer from the teacher's known specialties. Professor, he said, yes, the stone is safe, isn't it? He kept his voice even and entirely without subtext. For now, Dumbledore looked at him for a very long moment, long enough that Harry read it as confirmation of several things simultaneously. For now, Dumbledore said, yes, he paused. Mr. Potter, how much do you know? Enough, Harry said, and we're watching the situation. We, Dumbledore repeated. Hermione, Harry said, and me. Dumbledore was silent. We're not going to do anything reckless, Harry said. We're not going to try to get to it ourselves unless there's genuinely no other option. But I think you should know that if there isn't another option, he held Dumbledore's eyes, we're not going to stand by. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time with an expression that Harry would not have been able to name precisely, but that felt underneath everything like respect, not the condescending respect of an adult for a precocious child. Something closer to equal. I believe you, Dumbledore said. I would ask only that you trust that I am also watching. I do trust that, Harry said. I also know that one person watching isn't always enough. Dumbledore's beard moved. It might have been a smile. Good night, Mr. Potter. Good night, Professor. Harry put the cloak back on. He moved through the door and the room behind him was empty when he looked back. He walked through the midnight castle with the particular clarity of someone who had just had a conversation that confirmed something important, that he was being taken seriously, that the situation was real, and that the timeline was moving. He went directly to Hermione's corridor, knocked the pattern on the door to the girls' dorm staircase that she'd told him would wake her and not anyone else, and waited. She came down in less than 2 minutes in her dressing gown with her hair loose and her expression alert. She looked at his face and said, "What happened?" "Dumbledore," he said. "The mirror, come on." He tilted his head toward the common room. "I need to tell you all of it." They settled by the barely alive fire and he told her everything, the mirror, what he'd seen, Dumbledore's presence, the conversation, all of it complete in order. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her knees drawn up in the chair and her eyes on the embers. "What you saw in the mirror," she said, "the future version of yourself." "Yes, the calm thing." "Yes." She was quiet for another moment. "Then I've seen it, the real version. Sometimes when you're working something out, when you're in the middle of something that matters and you're completely focused, you get very still." She glanced at him. "It's there already. Mirror was just showing you an uninterrupted version." Harry looked at the embers. "What would you see?" he said. "In the mirror." She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, "I don't know," she said. "I thought I did before you told me what you saw. I thought it would be." She stopped. "I thought it would be something academic, a discovery, a book I'd written maybe." She looked at the fire. "But now I'm not certain." "What are you uncertain about?" She glanced at him, then looked away. "It doesn't matter right now," she said. "What matters right now is Quirrell and the stone and what Dumbledore does or doesn't do and when." "It matters," Harry said. "Harry, it matters," he said again, not pushing, just stating. She looked at the fire for a long moment. The embers shifted and gave off a last red light. "People," she said finally. "I think I'd see people." She said it quietly, like something she was just now finding the words for. "The same people always choosing to be there." She paused. "The way you described it." Harry looked at the side of her face. "Hermione," he said. "Yes, you know those people are already there right now." She looked at him. And for a moment, with the fire low and the castle quiet and the winter pressing against the windows, her expression was completely unguarded. No armor, no precision, just the thing underneath, which was something very human and very real, and now that he could see it clearly, enormously familiar. "Yes," she said. "I know." January came with owls. Lily's letter arrived first thing on the 2nd of January, and Harry recognized her cipher notation in the margin and passed the letter across the table to Hermione, who read the hidden message with the practiced ease of someone who'd been reading it for 3 years. She read it twice. Then she folded the letter very precisely and put it in her robe pocket. "Well," Harry said. Hermione looked at him across the breakfast table. Ron was beside Harry eating porridge without looking up. The great hall was beginning to fill with returning students, the noise building back to its usual pitch. "She confirmed the Quirrell read," Hermione said quietly. "She had information from Order contacts." Lily's Order connections from the war years still functioned as a network. This was something Harry had known for years. "Quirrell went to Albania 2 summers ago. That's where Voldemort's been in some form. The timeline fits." "So he came back with something," Harry said. "Yes." Hermione's voice was flat and factual. "She thinks it's more than just influence. She thinks Quirrell's being," she paused, "used as a vessel." Ron's spoon stopped moving. He'd been listening, Harry realized, with the focused peripheral attention of someone who was pretending not to listen and was actually very good at it. "You can say it," Harry said to him. Ron looked up. "How long have you known?" "Known for certain, 2 days ago. Suspected since November." Ron took this with the equanimity of someone who'd grown up around magic and had calibrated his threshold for alarming things accordingly. "And the stone's the target?" "Yes." Ron set his spoon down. He looked at Harry with the direct, uncomplicated attention that was one of the things Harry valued most about him. "What do? "We watch," Harry said. "We wait for Lily and James to respond fully. We don't move unless we have to." "And if we have to?" Harry looked at Hermione. She looked back at him. "We already know the route through the traps," she said. "We've mapped most of it theoretically." Ron looked from one to the other. "Of course you have," he said, with a tone that had given up on surprise and arrived at something warmer. "There's a chess problem," Hermione said. "Third trap, giant chess set. If the architectural logic holds, we're going to need someone good at chess." Ron's expression changed. "How good?" "Good enough to treat it as strategy and not a game," Harry said. Ron picked up his spoon again. "Right," he said, in the voice he used when he was committing to something. "Okay, I'm in." The great hall filled up around them, students returning from Christmas with owl mail and stories, and the particular energy of people coming back to something that felt, despite themselves, like home. The enchanted ceiling showed a January sky, pale and cold and clear. Harry ate his breakfast and thought about what was coming and felt not afraid but ready, that pre-match quality. The body understanding before the mind articulated it, that everything they'd built, everything they'd practiced, everything they'd been made into by people who loved them enough to prepare them completely, all of it was about to become necessary. He looked across the table at Hermione, who was reading Lily's letter again with her specific private expression. He looked to his right where Ron was eating with the focused calm of someone who'd just signed up for something and had no intention of backing down. He thought about Neville returning tomorrow, about the small tin of fudge and your essay was excellent and shoulders learning to stay level. He thought about the mirror, about the people standing alongside that reflected version of himself. Not missing, he'd told Dumbledore. Something I'm working toward. He looked around the table, not missing at all. Chapter 5, the third floor corridor. It was Neville who noticed first. Not because he was the most observant person in the room. Hermione had better data and Harry had better instincts, but because Neville had been watching Quirrell the way prey watched a predator, with a specific quality of attention that came from fear and sharpened it into something useful. He'd been doing it all term without knowing why, and by February he'd articulated it quietly to Harry after Defense Class 1 off. He's getting worse, Neville said. Harry looked at him. The cold feeling I told you about. Neville's voice was low, matter of fact. He'd been doing this more lately, stating things plainly without the apologetic scaffolding he'd built around everything he said in September. It's stronger and he smells different. Different how? Neville thought about it. Like something's rotting, he said, but underneath, like he's trying to cover it. Harry thought about this all the way back to the common room. When he told Hermione, she was quiet in the way that meant she was adding something to a calculation she'd been running for months. The vessel deteriorates, she said. Explain. If Voldemort is using Quirrell as a physical host, sharing a body with someone who isn't built to contain him, the strain would be enormous on both of them. She turned a page in the book she'd been cross-referencing for a week, something from the restricted section on dark magical possession. The host degrades. The possessing entity becomes more desperate as the host weakens. If Quirrell is getting worse, Voldemort's running out of time, Harry said. He needs the stone before the host fails, she said. Which means we're not watching a slow-developing threat anymore, we're watching a countdown. That night Harry wrote to James, not coded direct, because James's response to coded letters was always slightly slower than direct ones, and he needed James's particular kind of intelligence on this. James had fought Voldemort. James had survived a physical encounter. James knew things about how Voldemort operated that weren't in any book. The reply came the next morning by return owl, which meant James had been awake when it arrived or had set a charm on his desk that woke him for Harry's owl specifically, which was entirely possible. The letter was 2 pages in James's sharp, slightly impatient handwriting. Harry read it under the table during charms with the letter on his knee, and his wand performing the levitation exercise above with the automatic competence of something he could do in his sleep. James wrote, "The deteriorating host thing matches what we saw in the war. When he was weakening, his followers felt it. His operations became less precise, more urgent. Urgency was always when Voldemort was most dangerous. Don't mistake desperate for less capable. A cornered snake is more likely to strike, not less. And then tell Dumbledore if you haven't already. I know you've spoken to him. Tell him specifically what Neville told you about Quirrell. Dumbledore needs to move the stone or increase the protections or remove Quirrell from the school. If he doesn't act within 2 weeks, write to me again and I'll come myself." Harry folded it, thought about the "I'll come myself" and knew James meant it exactly and completely. He told Hermione at lunch. She read the letter, handed it back and said, 2 weeks is optimistic. I think we have less. How much less? I don't know, but Quirrell missed breakfast this morning. She looked at her plate. He's never missed breakfast before. McGonagall was in her office at 4 o'clock on a Thursday, which Harry knew from Sirius's annotated map, and he went to see her alone because there were things he wanted to say without committee. She opened the door before he knocked, which might have been coincidence. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Professor, I need 5 minutes." She stepped back and let him in. The office was the same as always, austere, organized, cat hair on the armchair she clearly sat in at home because it wasn't the desk chair and there was something about the wear of it that said long evenings. She sat at her desk. He sat across from her and told her directly what Neville had said, what Hermione had worked out, what James had written, all of it in the order it had happened. McGonagall listened without speaking. Her expression moved through several things, carefully controlled, but he'd been watching her for months and he could read the movements. Concern, anger directed somewhere behind her professional composure, something that might have been guilt briefly. When he finished, she said, "I'll speak to the headmaster today. He already knows some of it," Harry said. "I spoke to him in January." McGonagall's eyes sharpened. "He knows. He knows about Quirrell and the stone and that we're watching. He told me the stone was safe." Harry paused. "I believed him. I'm less certain now." "Why are you telling me?" she asked, and it wasn't a challenge, it was a real question. "Because Dumbledore trusts you completely," Harry said, "and because you'll push him in a way I can't." He met her eyes. "The stone needs to be moved, Professor, or Quirrell needs to be removed. One of those things needs to happen in the next few days." McGonagall looked at him for a long moment with the expression that was not quite maternal and not quite professional, but something precise and particular that he'd come to understand was her version of both at once. "Your father would have come in here the same way," she said. Not a compliment exactly, a statement of fact. "He said he'd come himself if necessary," Harry said. "That also sounds like James." She stood. "Go to your dormitory, Mr. Potter. I'll handle this." Harry stood. At the door he paused. "Professor." "Yes, if something happens before anything can be handled." He chose his next words carefully. "We know the route through the traps. Hermione mapped them." McGonagall was very still. "Of course she did," she said quietly. "I'm not saying we'd go without good reason, but I wanted you to know that if there was genuinely no other option, Mr. Potter." Her voice was quiet and absolutely clear. "There will be another option. I will make certain of it." "I believe you," he said. But I wanted you to know anyway," he said. "In case." She looked at him. He looked back. It was the kind of look that communicated a great deal without requiring words to do the work, the kind that only happened between people who understood each other. "Good night, Mr. Potter," she said. "Good night, Professor." The days that followed had the specific texture of waiting. Harry and Hermione ran their morning practice sessions in the unused classroom on the 6th floor that they'd quietly adopted in October. Remus had advised finding a dedicated space early before it was needed, and worked through the scenarios they'd theorized for the chambers beneath the trapdoor. Fluffy they'd seen. The Devil's Snare Sprout's contribution would respond to light and warmth, something to do with keys, chess. Something Snape had contributed that they'd worked backward from his known expertise and placed most likely as a potion logic puzzle. The chess was the one Harry worried about. He didn't worry about his own capabilities in any of the other chambers, not out of arrogance but out of honest assessment, the kind Remus had always insisted on. He knew what he could do. But the chess was Ron's territory, and while Harry trusted Ron completely, he also knew that wizard chess was not quite the same as the regular game Ron played at home, and the prospect of Ron having to think at speed under pressure with his friends watching was different from Ron beating his older brothers after dinner. He raised this with Ron directly. Ron looked at him across the chessboard in the common room on a Saturday afternoon. In schooling Harry at chess for months, Harry was genuinely good and Ron was simply better, which was a clean, uncomplicated fact they'd both arrived at comfortably. "You're worried I'll freeze," Ron said. "I'm worried the stakes might get in the way," Harry said. "You think differently when people you care about are watching." "Everyone does, some people more than others." Harry moved a bishop. "You play chess like you breathe when it's low stakes. You play it differently when you think you might lose." Ron looked at the board. He moved his knight and took Harry's bishop in one clean, inevitable movement. "How do you know?" "Watched you play your brothers," Harry said. "Percy versus the twins." Ron was quiet for a moment. "Percy I play normally, against the twins he stopped." "Against the twins you're trying to prove something," Harry said. "Against Percy you're just playing." Ron looked at him with the expression he wore when someone had said something accurate that he hadn't expected to hear. "Yeah," he said. "All right, yeah." He looked at the board. "The thing is," he moved another piece. "Wizard chess, the pieces tell you things. They're not quite like regular chess. They give you information, they have opinions. You have to learn to filter what's useful from what's just noise." He paused. "I'm good at that filter, even under pressure." He looked up. "I know the difference between when I'm playing safe because I'm afraid of losing and when I'm playing safe because it's correct. I've been working that out for months." "Remus would say that's the most important thing," Harry said. "Yeah, well," Ron's voice was dry and warm. "Don't tell him I'm using his framework for chess." "He'd be delighted," Harry said. "That's what I'm afraid of," Ron said and moved his queen. "Checkmate." Harry looked at the board, then at Ron. Ron met his eyes with absolute calm. "Yeah," Harry said. "You're ready." The night it happened was a Tuesday in June. They'd had a week of relative quiet that Harry had clocked as suspicious rather than reassuring. Quirrell had been present at meals again, which should have been better news but wasn't. There was a quality to his presence now that had shifted, the way weather shifted before a front came through, a pressure in the air around him. It was Hermione who came to get him. She knocked the pattern on his dormitory door at 11:30, after everyone else was asleep. 232, their knock since childhood, and he was already awake and already dressed because he'd felt the shift too and had been sitting on his bed in the dark for an hour with his wand in his hand and the cloak on his lap. He opened the door. She was fully dressed, wand out, her expression completely level. Behind her, Ron was in his dressing gown with his wand and his shoes on the wrong feet, and Neville was standing at the back with his jaw set. "Dumbledore's gone," she said. "Owl arrived tonight. I saw it at dinner, ministry seal, and he left within the hour. The protections on the stone just dropped to whatever's underneath them." "How do you know he's gone?" "The gargoyle on the 7th floor," she said. "It only comes alive when Dumbledore's in the building. It's stone right now, I checked." Harry looked at her, then at Ron, then at Neville. "We could wait," Ron said without any particular conviction. "Quirrell won't," Hermione said. "McGonagall," Harry said. "I tried." Her voice tightened. "Her office is empty. Snape's classroom is empty. I don't know where the staff is." She paused. "Someone drew them away. This was planned." Harry thought for exactly 3 seconds. James's letter, "Don't mistake desperate for less capable." McGonagall's voice, "There will be another option." The promise he'd made himself to not go without good reason. The calculation of what constituted good reason. Quirrell was going for the stone tonight without Dumbledore, with most of the staff apparently cleared from the corridors. "Right," he said. He picked up the cloak. "3rd floor, we go together." "Neville, I'm coming," Neville said before Harry could say anything else. Harry looked at him. "You know what we might be walking into?" "Yes," Neville said. Said it the way he'd said 2 inches on the broom, not bravely, because bravery was the performance of something. He said it the way people talked when they'd made a decision before the moment required it. "I know." "Good." Harry handed Neville the map. "Your navigation, watch the dots, call out anything moving toward us, especially any staff. Ron, you handle the chess." "Hermione, I know what I'm doing," she said. "I know you do." He looked at all of them. "One's out, no unnecessary noise. If we find Quirrell there and he's already past the traps, we send a patronus." "Well," he paused. They'd been working on patronuses. The theory was solid, the application was inconsistent. "We send the best signal we can and hold our position." He threw the cloak over himself, and then he was visible again, cloak in hand, looking at 3 people who had chosen this without being asked. He put the cloak away. "We go as we are," he said. "Nothing to hide." The 3rd floor corridor was empty. The door to Fluffy's chamber was already open, ajar not forced, which meant someone with knowledge had come through, had gotten past the harp music trick that sent Fluffy to sleep, had gone down before them. Harry pushed the door. Fluffy was sleeping in the enormous, impossible way of something that size, going fully unconscious. 3 heads lolled. 3 enormous chests rose and fell, the sound of the breathing like a slow engine. In the floor beside one massive paw was the trapdoor open. "He's already down," Hermione said. "How long ago?" Neville said, looking at the map. "There's only 1 dot in the correct location for the chamber system," she said, studying the map over Neville's shoulder. "It's not moving, it's deep in." "The last chamber," Harry said. She folded the map and gave it back to Neville. "Yes." They went down. The devil's snare was immediate, the darkness full of tendrils that reached with the patient efficiency of something that didn't hurry because it didn't have to. It found Harry's arm before he'd fully landed, and he felt the squeeze of it, the organic strength, and he heard Ron say something alarmed from behind him. "Don't struggle," Hermione said, already perfectly still. She raised her wand. Lumos solemn. The light that came from her wand was not the ordinary wand light of Lumos. It was sunlight, actual, concentrated, brilliant, and the snare recoiled from it as if struck, releasing every limb simultaneously, retreating into the walls. The chamber was suddenly lit like noon. Ron exhaled. "You just sunlight," she said. "Devil's snare needs darkness and damp. The charm isn't in most first-year texts, but it's in the herbological literature if you know where to look." She was already moving toward the next passage. "Come on." The winged keys were a cloud of darting silver in a chamber lit by nothing but their own glow, hundreds of them, different shapes, different sizes, moving in overlapping spirals. 4 broomsticks waited against the wall. The lock on the door glimmered. Harry had been looking at the keys for exactly 4 seconds when he identified the pattern. Not because he was a seeker, though that was part of it, the trained peripheral vision, the ability to track motion in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Because he'd spent months in practice sessions doing exactly this, identifying the one thing in a complex shifting field that was different. 1 key, large, old-fashioned, with a bent wing where it had been caught before. "I need 30 seconds, he said. He was on a broom before Ron had finished nodding, climbing fast, not chasing but positioning. He'd had this conversation with himself and with Ron about chess and about flying, and it was the same principle regardless of medium. He found the angle. The key came through its arc and he moved to meet it rather than pursuing it, and had it in his hand in 21 seconds. The door opened. The chess set was enormous and silent and waiting in a chamber that smelled like stone and the cold of deep underground. White pieces on one side, black on the other, each piece the height of a full-grown adult. The horses real enough to shift weight. The pawns turned toward them with blank stone patience. There were 3 of them and 4 squares needed on the black team, a knight, a bishop, a castle, and a queen position empty. Ron looked at the board for exactly as long as he needed to. Harry watched him do it, watched the specific quality of his attention going fully inward, the external world dropping away while he processed the geometry. "Knight," Ron said to Harry. "Bishop to you, Hermione. I'll take the castle." "What's your plan?" Hermione said. 6 moves, Ron said. "Maybe 7. The White Queen is the problem. She's positioned to take anything that comes up the center. She'll move first if we threaten the king directly, so we don't." He looked at the board. "We go around, force her out of position." "What do you need us to do?" Harry said. "Exactly what the pieces tell you. They know the board better than you do. Listen to them, don't override them unless I say." He glanced at Neville. "You're a spare piece. If one of us gets taken." "What do you mean taken?" Neville said. "Wizard chess is physical," Ron said, simply, without drama. "The pieces take each other the way they do in the real game. If a white piece comes for you, you clear the square as fast as you can and call it." He met Neville's eyes. "It's not going to happen if everyone moves when I say and how I say, but if it does, clear the square fast. The pieces don't want to hurt you, they just have a job." Neville nodded. He'd gone slightly pale, but his jaw was set in the way Harry recognized. They took their positions. Ron ran the game. Watching him do it was something Harry would carry for a very long time afterward, not because it was dramatic, though it was, the white pieces moving with the cold authority of something old and purposeful, the clashing of stone when pieces took each other, the grinding sound when the board shifted. What he'd carry was the quality of Ron's focus, the complete absence of performance. No showing off, no second-guessing, no evidence of the boy who played differently against his brothers when something was at stake. Just the game run cleanly with total commitment to the logic of it. 5 moves. The White Queen moved twice, repositioned, moved again. 6 moves. The bishop cleared a path. 7. Ron looked at the board and was still for 3 full seconds. "Harry," he said. "Yes, I need to move my castle." His voice was completely flat. "The Queen will take it." Harry understood immediately. "Ron, it opens the king 2 moves after you win." He looked at the board, not at Harry. "It's the only line." "There's another line," Harry said. "There isn't." He said it without emotion, which was how Harry knew it was true. Ron without emotion was Ron who'd seen the board completely and accepted what it showed. "If I don't move the castle, we're at stalemate in 3 and we lose the time advantage. Quirrell's already down there." Harry looked at the board. He looked at Ron. "It won't hurt much," Ron said, and the corner of his mouth moved. "Probably." "Ron," Hermione said, and her voice had the thing in it that she rarely let all the way out. "I know," he said. "Go." He moved the castle. The White Queen moved in 3 long, grinding strides that seemed to take forever and no time at all, and when she arrived at Ron's square her stone arm swung and Ron hit the board like a felled tree and did not get up. Harry was moving before the sound finished, not to Ron, though everything in him wanted to, but to the king's position, because Ron had just paid for that square and he would not waste it. Hermione's hand caught his arm for 1/2 second, not stopping him but just there, briefly her hand on his arm, and then she let go. He moved to the final square. "Checkmate," he said. The white pieces froze. The board went still. In the sudden silence, Ron groaned from his square on the board, which was the best possible sound. He was conscious. He was going to have bruises that lasted a month. He was conscious. "Go," Ron said from the floor, not opening his eyes. "I'm fine, I'm absolutely fine, go." Harry looked at Hermione. She looked back. Neither of them said what they were thinking because it didn't need saying. "Neville, stay with him," Harry said. "Keep the map. If anything changes, I've got him," Neville said, already crossing to Ron, already kneeling. "Go," they went. The potion chamber was the last. A line of flames across the entry, a line of flames across the exit, 7 bottles on a table, a rolled piece of parchment, and the logic puzzle Hermione had predicted from Snape's known expertise in potions-based magical architecture. The room beyond the forward flames, dark, cold, visible through the barrier, was where the stone was. Harry could feel it, not in any mystical sense, but in the way you felt a destination when everything had been pointing toward it. Hermione unrolled the parchment. He watched her read it. She read it once fully, then read it again, and he could see the specific quality of her moving through it, not anxious, not performing the working out for anyone's benefit, just thinking. "Nettle wine," she said. "Bottle 3 to get through the black flames behind us, bottle 7 to go forward." She hadn't hesitated between the first reading and the conclusion. "You're certain? The puzzle is designed to eliminate people who work on guesswork," she said. "It rewards logical elimination. I ran the constraints, 3 go forward, 1 goes back, 2 are nettle wine, 1 is poison. The small and round bottles are the smallest possible containers for the magical volume required for the forward barrier. Bottle 7 is the smallest round one." She picked it up and looked at it. "1 mouthful each, barely enough for 2. He looked at it. "Barely enough for 2, he said. "Yes," she said. She said it with something behind it that she wasn't articulating, but he heard anyway. "Then you go back," he said. "Harry, you go back, you get Ron and Neville, you get them out. You send an owl to McGonagall, she has to be somewhere, she said she'd handle it." He met her eyes. "You're better than me at the logistics. Getting 3 people out of this obstacle course in an emergency, that's you." Her jaw tightened. "That's not the only reason you're sending me back." "No," he said, "it's not." She looked at him with the expression he recognized from the common room in January, from the conversation about the mirror and what they'd each see, the open, unguarded version, the one without the armor. "What if he's already in there?" she said. "What if Quirrell? Then I handle it." "You can't face Voldemort alone." "I'm not going to be alone."